Councillor Dennis. Any silence for the Mayor's Chaplain, Father Simon Pete. So now all for praise.
In the worst of all of the Christian parables, man is praised for cheating his boss by writing down the debts he's owed as being lower. But it is a reminder that very often a perfect solution isn't possible, it's not going to produce results. And an imperfect solution may well be the right answer at actually getting some effective results.
Please sit. Please note that this meeting is being filmed for publication on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Therefore, if you are participating in this meeting, you are consenting to being recorded and the use of those recordings for broadcasting. If you have any queries regarding this, please speak to a Council officer after the meeting. Please also note that some members of the public may be exercising their legal right to record the meeting. This is entirely independent of the Council, and the Council has no control over the use of this recorded material. If you have any questions, please speak to the people who are making these recordings. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I have apologies from Councillor Brunt and Councillor Draper for lateness, and apologies from Councillor Curtin and Councillor Steele.
And apologies for lateness from Councillor Crowley's second friend.
No other apologies? Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Are the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of July 2019 agreed? I'm going to be brief because I know we're up against it on the time. Deputy Mayor and I have had a busy summer, and I'm delighted to say that our first event, the charity cricket match, made over £750 for the Mayor and Merton's charities. So thank you to Mitcham Cricket Club, the councillors took part, and those that came to support the event on the day. You've all got some flyers for forthcoming events in front of you. Can I encourage you to form teams of 4 for the quiz night, either one ward or 2 wards together? It's a Meet the Brewer night at the Hand in Hand. It's turn up and pay, so if you fancy coming along in the evening, it's just £15 on the night. And finally, apologies for raising the C word Christmas so early, but please do support my Mayor's Christmas dinner at Wimbledon Club on Saturday the 30th of November. Thank you. Does the leader have any announcements? The next item is the public questions. You have a list in front of you of 26 questions from members of the public. Answers have been provided by the appropriate cabinet member. Each questioner now has the right to ask a further supplementary question. Please make your question brief and not a statement. I will call each person's name in turn based on the order the questions were received. If you would like to ask a supplementary question, please indicate to me clearly, and I will ask you to come to the seat masked public questions in the front of the gallery. We will get through as many as we can in 15 minutes allowed. Please all note that your microphones will be operated for you, and please speak clearly. Firstly, is Ricardo Blackwell present?
Yes.
So my question is, park bylaws prohibit the lighting of fires in all parks. Why is Merton risking the health and safety of park users by allowing barbecues resulting in fires and bins, the children's playground, and causing harmful pollution, thereby failing its duty of public safety and government clean air objectives?
Well, thank you, Maria, and thanks to Mr. Lava for the supplementary question. As I've said in my written response, we are proposing to hold a community-wide consultation, and I advise that we wait for the result of that consultation. Thank you.
Joyce Counting. MJ Lucy. Tom Killick.
I thank the Cabinet member for his reply. I was at the sustainability panel which he quotes in his answer, and I heard the gentleman from the earlier Scotch Angel, I think his name, say that, I quote, there have been fines deducted from the contract. That being the case, I'm not clear why the Council believes it's still commercially sensible to reveal whatever fines have been paid or payments returned.
I'd like to thank you for coming tonight and also for this supplementary. As explained in the answer, whilst nobody denies that the service has not been acceptable from our point of view, and nobody denies that we have been enforcing the contract, and we are seeking to achieve the best outcome financially for the Council, as well as in terms of the street cleanliness. And so therefore it is true to say that fines have been made. Because of commercial considerations, it is not possible for us under the law to, at this point, go into detail about what the actual figures were. So we can confirm they've taken place, which is I think we've asked in that supplementary, but what you asked in the original question about the amount, unfortunately, is given at the present time.
Can I just remind that answers should come through the chair? Kevin Clark. Tamara Kohler. Stephanie Biden. Barry Smith. Luke Taylor. Archer Dressales. John Braithwaite. Samaya Nujad. Samantha MacArthur, Hugo Forshaw, Shipra Gupta, Richard Poole, Emily Williams, Christine Denwood, Chris Stanton, Pippa Maslin,
in the absence of the detail that I was hoping for, where exactly is the £90,000 going? Which parks and which projects in those parks?
Thank you very much, Ms. Maslin, for a supplementary question. I don't think it would be clearer. Parks and open spaces are not statutory requirements, and so therefore the funds that we raise from there go to what we do to keep the parks and open spaces in shape for everyone to enjoy. Thank you.
Sarah Sharp.
Thank you for the response, which really doesn't respond to my question. Since the council does redact the personal data of public representations to put on the public file, why isn't it uploading it onto the website, to the portal? And given that you say that you will inform the public of amendments to the planning processes, that is actually not happening at the moment. So can you please tell us what timescale you are working towards making sure that representation is available in the public domain to ensure transparency? Thank you.
I'd like to thank Councillor Sharp for her supplementary question, Madam Mayor. All our planning representations can be accessed at the Civic Centre at inspection. We are an open and accessible council. This was taken after advice in relation to the Information Commissioner, and I believe it was the right decision to have actually taken as a council. Thank you.
Daniel Begley, Nicola Thompson, Ingrid Dickinson, Eve Curley.
I thank the Cabinet Member for the response to my initial question. The reason for that initial question was that on the 21st of August, I emailed the Planning Department to ask if any representations had been received for a particular planning application. I received a standard response stating in order to formally record the process and acknowledge my comments, they first required provision of my full postal address, and they couldn't process my communication further until such a time as this was received. This response was clearly inappropriate and wasted more of my time having to email again and the planning team's time having to reply again. Whilst I welcome a recent change to the instructions on how to request view representations by directing to the planning representation's email address, would you not agree that there is a need to have some differentiation between requests to view planning representations and submissions of planning representations, perhaps by use of a different email address or using a standard subject line, so that the process could operate more efficiently? And I also pointed out a minor amendment is needed to the new statement on the website, as it uses puts the planning team twice in the same sentence, one after the other.
I'd like to thank Eve Cohen for her supplementary answer. In terms of the suggestions she has actually made, it's certainly something we can look into further. In relation to the instructions, they have actually, as you're aware, now been changed in terms of the website, so it is more clearer in terms of accessing those representations. Thank you.
Emma Madison. We will now move to item 6, Councillors' questions to Cabinet members. I will read out each member's name in the order they appear in the supplementary agenda and invite you to ask a supplementary question. Please ensure all supplementary questions are brief and not a statement. We will get through as many as possible in 15 minutes. Firstly, Councillor McKay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for his response. The residents of Ravensbury will need to get to work, they need to take their children to school, and they need to go about their everyday business. Will the Cabinet Member give me and the residents of Ravensbury an undertaking that he will introduce a much needed sense of urgency into allowing people to go to work, to take their children to school, to go about their everyday business?
I'd like to thank Councillor McKay for his supplementary answer, and I would also like to put on record my thanks to both Councillor Peter McKay, Councillor Natasha Ryan and Steve Britters for the work they have done with local residents following the bridge collapse in June of this year. Of course, we're trying to expedite things as quickly as possible in terms of the repairs that will be needed in terms of the bridge, but also whether it need a partial rebuild or a full rebuild. We hope to have that report ready within the next month. As soon as that report is available, it will be obviously open to councillors to scrutinise that report as we make a decision. But please rest assured, this is a high priority for myself, and I share the frustrations, like many motorists in this borough, that I have to make a detour, but hopefully we will obviously have a bridge back in order as soon as is feasible. Thank you.
Councillor Breton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, will the Deputy Leader and the Cabinet Member of Finance apologise to the residents of Merton and to all councillors, particularly his own councillors, Madam Mayor, for not telling them about the £11 million sitting there in the budget surplus as the council closed its books at the end of the financial year, and for allowing all these councillors and all the committees throughout the entire year to make their decisions, not realising that he had £11 million sitting more in his bank account than he actually told them about. Will he apologise to the Merton Music Foundation as well for cutting their funds to £20,000 when he actually had a surplus of £11 million? Disgraceful. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I'd like to thank you for his response, but remind him that the disgrace of council financing at the moment lies absolutely 100% on the government's plate. If the government would fund councils properly, we wouldn't be making cuts. Year after year after year, we are placed into an invidious position where we have to plan for cuts. There are some years where we're able to get through our budget well, and there are some years, most years recently, where we've had to make additional cuts because we've overspent. A good, prudent council works through year by year, the good years and the bad years, and evens them out, and that's what we have been doing, and it's in stark contrast to the Tory government that has cut and cut and cut, and he should be the one apologising, so should they.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank the Cabinet Member for his response. You really join me in paying tribute to the Council staff who do such a great job delivering services in Morden and the rest of the borough. And what message would you give to the government to support our staff?
Ben, thank you for his follow-up. It's very important that we use opportunities like this, Madam Mayor, to highlight and draw attention to the fantastic work that the staff of Merton Council do and have done over many years, and to highlight the pressures and stresses that are on them as a result of austerity. It's been continuing since 2010. It is a disgrace, as I said earlier, that they have cut the funding to such an extent that our staff have had very small pay rises since 2007. It is time now, after nearly 10 years of austerity, for the government to draw back from that and to properly reward the people in our community who do so much to make Merton a great place for families, a great place for all of us to live. Thank you.
Councillor Coler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to thank Councillor Allison for his answer. What advice would Councillor Allison give to any responsible contractor who wants to pay the London living wage, but are concerned they will then be undercut by less scrupulous competitors who don't? Can you also explain why it's acceptable to not insist on any terms concerning sick pay, holiday pay, or use of 0-hour contracts?
Thank you for his follow-up. As I said in my response, we do like it when contractors and people who are procuring from offer the London living wage and terms and conditions. That's something that we obviously like to see. but also we have to be responsible for the council's finances. That's a sad reality that if our costs go up in one area, it means that we have to make cuts in others. And it's a very difficult position that we put ourselves in. The way that we ensure that we have the best contracts is not by price alone, there's also quality requirements too. What I would like to say is that in terms of quality, the work that our staff do and that our contractors do on the whole is very, very good. And the people who work so hard in our communities, really, they do need to be respected. The government does need to provide the funding that is required in order to properly reward them. And I'm sure that he will agree with that. And should he be successful in the next few weeks in going up to Parliament and negotiating the amount should be for the government, we'll make sure that Merton gets the amount that we need to provide good services here, because it isn't happening at the moment.
Councillor Pecuniary.
I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for her response. What are the numbers of children in boroughs with special educational needs and disabilities?
Thank you, Councillor. Like many other boroughs, all other boroughs, we've experienced an increase in children with special educational needs and disabilities. So the numbers of pupils who have an education, health and care plan, which outlines the additional support they need to deal with their needs and disabilities, has risen from around 1,500 2 years ago to nearly 1,900 this year, as well as extending the age range. So we now support children down to 0 and up to 25. And this, along with other pressures, means is what is leading to the overspend on the high block that we are witnessing and that other councils up and down the country are witnessing.
Councillor Morden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for his response. Thank you for confirming the Council will meet the Christmas deadline. Morden regeneration is of great interest to our residents. Would he be willing to meet with you to go over the proposals to ensure that this regeneration project finally does move forward?
I'd like to thank Councillor McCain for his supplementary, and my door is always open to councillors of all parties. I think it's important that all parties work together in terms of delivering Morden regeneration, because it has a lot of positive benefits for the town centre in terms of housing, retail, but also as well improving the look and feel of the area. So my door is open, and I'm more than willing to meet and discuss with councillors of all parties in the Morden area.
Councillor Richard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, the Cabinet Member, for the response. Can the Cabinet Member please give me further details on what the Department is doing to ensure that the stadium will open on time?
I'd like to thank Councillor Pritchard for his supplementary. Clearly, obviously, we are liaising very closely with both Galliard, who is the developer around the stadium, but also as well in terms of the club in delivering the stadium for September 2020. So we do have regular liaison with both, and I'm pleased to announce that it is on track to be finished in September 2020, which will be a great bonus for Wimbledon, because Wimbledon FC is finally coming home.
Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for her detailed answer. I wonder, Madam Mayor, if the Cabinet Member could tell me whether she thinks the unfortunate situation where the quality impact assessment process wasn't followed, which led to the successful call-in of parking strategy, was a one-off, or if she thinks it's indicative of a wider issue. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Councillor Fairclough for his supplementary, and I think this just demonstrates how well scrutiny works, and that everyone was given a fair opportunity to scrutinise the policy and have a call-in, and we've got a successful end to that.
And the final question, Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for her response, but she now answered this question. How does the number of secondary school places this year compared to last year highlight the needs in the borough?
Thank you, Councillor. where we've seen an increase in the number of children applying for secondary schools within the borough. So this year there were nearly 1,500 Merton children who had offers made in secondary schools, compared to 1,200 and it was a bit more than that 2 years ago. So we really have seen a significant increase, which demonstrates the need for the additional school places that we've been providing. I'd like to thank the previous cabinet member for her work on delivering on that expansion.
Thank you. And before we move on, I'd just like to thank everyone for keeping their questions and answers through. And if we can continue to do that with a fair wind, we'll probably end on time. We are now on item 7, the strategic theme of sustainable communities with a focus on enforcement. We will begin with the Councillors' strategic theme questions, and I will follow the same procedure as with the previous item. Firstly, Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for his response and ask him, what can the Cabinet Member tell us about further efforts by the Department to clamp down on road landlords?
I'd like to thank Councillor Kenny for her supplementary. Cracking down on road landlords is one of my top priorities. We brought an enforcement policy to Council to Cabinet in June, which introduces penalties. We also had a successful prosecution back in August, and we also have another 2 that are pending in court at the moment. We're also looking at introducing a selective landlord licensing scheme to improve conditions further in the borough. Let me place on record, it is a priority of mine to ensure that we do have high standards, and we will take all necessary action to crack down on road landlords within Merton. Thank you.
Councillor Holden.
Thank you to the Cabinet Member for his answer. Regretfully acknowledges me and in his answer and the problem that I've been talking about in this place for years. Will he commit to meeting with me, taxi groups, London Station, TfL and local residents to resolve this problem of air pollution at London Station once and for all?
Well, Madam Mayor, can I thank him for his question and his supplementary, and in the interest of brevity, yes I can.
Councillor Lyons.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet for his response. Just to follow up though, could you give us some details for the timeline of the flying tipping strategy and the action plan, please?
Madam Mayor, can I thank her for her question and her supplementary question and for the work that she's done as Chair of the Sustainable Communities Scrutiny Panel. I think it's important to say that we are already implementing the actions within the flying tipping strategy and action plan. We have simply labelled it as draft because we are very keen to receive feedback from councillors from across the chamber. I will be writing to all councillors in the next week to invite them to a further workshop following those held last year based on collection days, and part of the discussion I hope to have in those workshops will be to discuss the fly tipping strategy, any feedback and any particular interventions people think might be needed in their own wards. So the measures are being implemented, but we are keen to receive any feedback any colleagues have.
Councillor O'Marble.
Can I thank the Cabinet Member for his response? Can the Cabinet Member update the Council on what concrete steps, such as a low emission bus zone, which was passed by a motion in February, will be included in the Climate Change Action Plan? And will the Cabinet Member ensure that the working group included representations from all parties?
Can I thank him for his question and for his supplementary question? I think we need to be clear what the action plan is being used to do, because the action plan will contain the areas in which the council will need to look at in order to decarbonise the borough by 2050 and the council services by 2030. But that's quite separate from a number of other measures that we might already be looking at, including low emission zones and other things that were in the air quality action plan. And there's nothing to prevent those coming forward in advance of the action plan to tackle climate change. In respect of the working group, the application process has been running over the summer. Any council was able to apply to it, and indeed one did apply to it.
So if there is any further interest in sitting on it, I would encourage members to contact me very quickly because we are in the process of finalising that in the next few days.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for her reply. How does she feel following through the prosecutions help with the enforcement?
And I'd like to thank Councillor Pierce for the supplementary question. And I'd like to use the road trader Joseph Morden to highlight the good work that our officers are doing regarding this. So basically he was a road trader that scammed Merton residents and he was brought to justice. People like himself ruin lives, and I would just like to urge anyone who suspects and who have any suspicion of such behavior to report it to our to our training standard department here, because they are willing to take on these cases and fight to make sure that they bring those people to justice. Thank you very much.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you for the Cabinet Member for their reply. I've heard lots of concern from residents who find it really helpful to be able to look at the comments from other residents on the planning website. We've very kindly been quoted an article from the GDPR rules. But Article 32 also says that you can have a look at the risks and see whether and weigh up the risks of a GDPR breach. And I wonder if the Cabinet Member would be willing to take legal advice on whether we really have to carry on like this, and then publish the legal advice. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Councillor McGrath for his supplementary question. In relation to obviously the legal advice is the information that's given by the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Officer. Everything we do is legal and above board. In terms of many other councils, they've also taken them off their websites following advice. Clearly, in terms of the representation, they are readily accessible to people who come to the Civic Centre.
No, they're not.
Clearly, they are accessible to people who come to the Civic Centre.
No, they're
and
not.
I have to say we are a very open and transparent council, and all statutory representations are still published on the website. Thank you.
Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you to Cabinet Member for his answer. Cabinet Member is the third to oversee the earlier contract in 2.5 years. What do you expect to happen first? Performance will reach the same level as when the service was delivered in-house, or a fourth Cabinet Member will take over his role?
Madam Mayor, can I thank him for his question and his very wishy supplementary. In respect of the curbside collection, I think it is important to say that actually the performance has stabilised considerably from the initial rollout of the Quill bins. And whilst we are still experiencing too many miscollections, we are experiencing a similar number to that which we were experiencing prior to the service change. So the numbers have begun to stabilise. They are still too high, and I hope I will still be around to sort them out first. Thank you.
Councillor Christie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to the Cabinet Member for her response. Could I ask how the Cabinet Member is working with representatives in City Hall in order to improve the safety for our borough?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for listening for his supplementary question. We are working very closely with City Hall, and we had our major conference last week on training standards for underage sale of knives. We are working very closely to ensure that children don't have the use of knives. And one of the things that was interesting at the conference from the Deputy Mayor of London, Sophie Linden, she said that what we have to do is to prevent these youngsters from getting themselves associated with knives and stabilizing with all its best to ensure that we work with the local licensing court in Wimbledon to implement Section 60 to ensure that stop and search is carried out throughout the world so that we keep our residents safe.
Councillor Member.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would you please explain what the difference between a voucher and a schedule? And member expect for leader to quickly improve the services. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, can I thank him for his question and his supplementary, and also for the advance notice of the supplementary. On the first question of what is the difference between a rota and a schedule, I think we are getting into a question of semantics. We are talking about one document. The area will work to a schedule, a rota, whatever you want to call it, and it is that I am asking them to make publicly available so that residents will be able to monitor when their streets should be being swept, and that will help align our monitoring and enforcement activity. On his second question about how quickly I think the area's performance in respect of street cleansing will improve, I think we do need to recognise that there are several factors that are impacting the refuse currently on our streets, and that's not all related to the area. So that is prevalent supply tipping, it's some of our resident behaviour, it's the sideways policy we still have in the east of the borough, it's the challenges we have with collections from flats above shops. And work is taking place to address all of those, which is independent from the work that's taking place with the area, principally through the Climate strategy and our broader Cleaner Merton strategy. But it is important to say that none of that excuses the area's performance when it comes to street cleansing. I spent half a day with officers and Scott Edghill from the area last month, touring the borough and looking at particular hotspots for street cleansing. And on the back of that, Scott Edghill promised to publish an improvement plan that would set out how the area would look to address some of these challenges. I hope that improvement plan will be published in the next few weeks, and when it is, along with the other measures that I've already announced, I hope that we will start to see the improvements. Thank you.
Councillor Dean.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for his, I use the word reply because there's no answer. We have the famous socialist, the proposed timetable will be published in due course. The question I would love to answer is how many people responded to the consultation and how many of those were against? Was it more than 51.8%, for example? I know that the fellows over there like people's vote, and I'm just wondering if you would let the people of Wimbledon get that opportunity to vote for this parking tax, yes or no? Thank you, Madam Mayor. Oh, yes, it's not. I thought it was the other fellow.
I think obviously Councillor Dean needs to get the right cabinet members sorted out for his next questions at the answers to the council. In relation to his points, we believe that this is the right strategy going forward to improve air qualities and emissions here in Merton. We believe that they are fair and proportionate in terms of this implementation. If Councillor Dean is so keen on votes, then he should support a second referendum.
And the final question, Councillor Morden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I thank the Cabinet Member for his written answer. Could I press him for further details? Given the fact that year after year, governments of both Liberal Democrats and Conservatives have cut Merton Council's ability to invest in services such as our enforcement operations, can he outline any plans to work with partners, for example housing associations, to support our enforcement operations?
I'd like to thank Councillor Mudley for his supplementary. We do work with a wide range of partners. As he is well aware from Pollard's Hill, we work closely with remote housing on a number of enforcement issues, including on waste, but also housing enforcement issues. Likewise, with Clarion on many estates across the borough in terms of ongoing enforcement issues that exist. Working with partners is integral to our work in terms of enforcement, and I look forward to that relationship continuing as we move forward. Thank you.
Please note that the remaining member questions and answers will be circulated after the meeting in line with constitutional requirements. We are now going to deal with the strategic theme main report. I'm going to invite a Cabinet member to present and then seek a seconder. I will then invite any members that wish to speak on the main report to do so. After that, we will take the motions and vote on them. Finally, we will then vote on the main report. Councillor Welton, please present the strategic theme report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally remove the report and recommendation, along with 3 other Cabinet members, Councillor Cooper-Marvier, Councillor Byers and Councillor McCauley, we share enforcement in this council. My areas of responsibility are planning, highways, housing and parking. It's probably true to say that these areas do generate much correspondence from both councillors and members of the public, given it is integral to the work of many of those services. One of our biggest areas of enforcement is planning, where we carry out over 700 investigations each year, including unauthorised building works, hours of operation, adverts, works to listed buildings and uses. Outcomes of investigation include enforcement notices being served, prosecutions enacted and direct action initiated in an effort to rectify the breach. The number of complaints in recent years has been rising, which brings with its own challenges, especially in terms of recruitment and retention of qualified staff, but also in dealing with caseload. This problem is not unique to Merton, but replicated across London. Recently, the entire development control team blitzed the borough with visits to properties. This one yielded 30 case closures following over 120 site visits in one day. I'm pleased to say that the backlog is reducing in terms of enforcement, despite significant budgetary pressures which have resulted in a smaller team. But I'm well aware of the concerns which have been expressed, which is why I'm proactively working with officers to get additional support into the team. With the growing private rented sector in the borough, housing enforcement continues to be a major challenge. In June, Cabinet approved a refreshed housing enforcement policy, which includes the introduction of civil penalties. The aim of that policy is to promote efficient and effective approaches to the inspection and enforcement, but also tackling poor housing conditions in the borough. This council takes a proactive approach to housing enforcement and offers to target those landlords who deliberately or persistently break the law. Where poor conditions are identified in a privately rented property, action is taken to identify and inspect other properties owned and managed by that same individual or company. Officers seek to identify HMOs that require mandatory licence and properties where Category 1 hazards exist. In August, I'm pleased to say we had a successful prosecution, with a landlord from Streatham pleading guilty to failing to register a house in multiple occupancy. He was fined nearly £2,000 along with costs. We also have 2 further pending prosecutions. As a council, we are determined to tackle bad landlords, and we will take tough action on any landlord operating in an illegal way in Merton. We will not hesitate to take robust enforcement action against those breaching their responsibilities under HMO legislation, especially since the important change in legislation introduced last October by Karen Buck MP, which means that in private legislation, there is a minority of rogue landlords who seek to profiteer by cramming people into substandard homes, providing adequate facilities or who breach safety standards. We are also undertaking further work on introducing a landlord licensing scheme which would require each individual HMO and not the building within which it is situated. The Council continues to explore the introduction of a selective licensing scheme for Merton. Such a scheme, if introduced, would be likely to make Merton a better place to rent and have benefits for the wider community. On parking, I'm pleased to say that we've seen the launch of 5 safe school zones in the borough at Links, Thomas and Canterbury, Harris Academy Primary and Civic, making these areas safer for young people, improving air quality and encouraging more sustainable modes of transport. There is many positives in terms of ongoing enforcement in the borough, but we are aware of the many challenges we face and are determined as a council to take robust action plus action. Thank you.
This has been formally seconded by Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Andrew Howard.
Madam Mayor, thank you. I would first like to thank the council officers involved in the preparation of this wide range report. It shows that they and their colleagues are certainly using their best endeavours to ensure that the citizens of Merton are being properly served, at least within the constraints of the priorities being set by the current Labour administration. It is of course clear that the officers remain significantly under-resourced in key areas, but in the context of this council having achieved an 11 million budget surplus, this can hardly delay at the door of what is dogmatically, inaccurately and repeatedly referred to as Tory austerity. It's only off the back of the government's focus on deficit reduction that we are now in fact seeing significant increases in public expenditure. However, I sense the Mayor's impatience that I return to local matters which are more properly the focus of the present proceedings. We have a long agenda here and a guillotine to avoid, having praised the officers for their endeavours, but I will restrict my attention to just a few points that still need to be made. Issues around waste and street environment, of course, continue to affect all parts of the borough. I know that my colleagues will be addressing those issues in more detail and the comments that have already been made, but as a village council, my residents would expect me to voice particular concern on their behalves. They suffer the same levels of inconvenience as experienced right across Merton. I have to say, it's a shame that enforcement in the definition of the present report does not extend to the Labour administration's management of key outsourcing contracts. But I move on. As a village councillor, it would be surprising, I've got no comment around planning. We have already heard residents' concerns with regard to process, and it is a matter which rather dominates the interest of myself and my board colleagues. The officers make no bones about their long-running struggle to manage their caseload in the face of what has been a long-term shortage of key resource. Steps are being taken, and that is to be welcome, but in the meantime, my residents are constantly faced with apparently arbitrary recommendations that suggest a lack of interest in protecting their rights and their environment. In my short time as a councillor, I am personally appalled by the repeated re-presentations of substantively identical applications that have been properly declined by the Planning Applications Committee. Each time, however, the officers seem compelled to recommend approval, sometimes because the reasons for previous rejections have not been properly noted. In addition, we also, of course, have numerous instances of developers breaching their approved plans, but officers feeling apparently constrained from making orders to cease and rectify works. I have to ask if they have been properly advised of their powers and indeed their duties in such circumstances. Moving on again, I will not dwell on parking, as I think that may well has indeed already been referred to elsewhere, although recent measures questionably taken in the name of air pollution control offer a neat segue to environmental health. Within that section, we see a particular pride being taken in the removal of a ladder being used in an unsafe manner within the unsanitary environs of a dodgy Japanese takeaway. I'll not argue that such actions are important, but it does seem remarkable that such an incident somehow upstays the otherwise unmentioned and potentially highly damaging dust cloud explosions which have, as a matter of record, been taking place at a certain cement bagging plant within Wimbledon Park Ward, presenting a real threat to local residents and the schools within the immediate vicinity, including within Trinity Ward. Within Trinity, it is my fellow Conservative councillors, past and present, who have engaged with local community leaders and have been pushing hard for an adequate response from the officers concerned. Worryingly for us all, I have received correspondence suggesting that the council officers are uncertain how to control such industrial operations, even having issued the operator with a permit for the plant to be established. There are gaps in process which have to be dealt with as a matter of urgency. There is a clear and present risk to air quality and the health of residents, and far more serious than the dubious apparently presented by cars illegally parked outside their homes. Thank you, Madam
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to extend my thanks to officers as well for the report that's in front of us. As often happens with these reports, I tend to be left with more questions than I am answered. But while I appreciate this, and we're past the question section of the meeting, I appreciate it as I go. I'll drop a few in if the cabinet member would get back to me afterwards. I'll happily email them the details. The report covers a lot. I would like to briefly reference the matter of the surplus. I do think it's incumbent upon the Council and the Cabinet member to explain the surplus and how it came about and what it is going to be used for. But that said, I do recognise, unlike the Conservatives, the constraints that the Council budget is otherwise under, or has been in the past. So really three services. The thing that sort of stood out for me here, knife crime in particular is a rising issue, and it doesn't seem at the moment that there are any plans to increase test purchases. And I wondered, looking at the report, whether the Cabinet would consider that. There does seem to be a case as part of a holistic approach to tackling knife crime, to look at that as part of it and have conversations with the local police about the effectiveness of it. Planning enforcement. I'll echo the comments made already. It's good that there is finally action being taken. It does appear that there is now a budget to address this. It's clearly been going on for a long time. I echo some of what's been said already. I know that many of us in our own wards will have cases that either are delayed or haven't been addressed properly. So I think it is. I think we'll all wait with bated breath to see if this new proposal has the impact that it said it will. But I think we're all quite frustrated, and there are clearly things that are going wrong as a result of the constraints on the team. Housing enforcement. I see the Cabinet member repeated the phrase in the report that the Council have a proactive approach to housing enforcement. My question was, is it though? That's not how it appears to residents or to us on the opposition benches. As an example, there are getting no housing enforcement figures in the report at all. When will we get these? We know that Merton has a record on prosecutions in particular, something that we've raised before. Is that something that's going to be improved, and if so, when? It also talks about making licensing, making Merton a better place to rent. You've been in control a long time now. It's been a long time to address that issue. When will it be addressed? Thank you.
Speakers, Councillor Wilson, do you wish to use your right to reply?
I'll just be obviously very, very brief, so also conscious for time. This council suffered major budgetary challenges. We've lost a third of our budget over the last 10 years, and we've also had the disgraceful decision this week not to make business rates retention permanent, which could have potentially huge financial ramifications for this council going forward. I'd like to touch on Councillor Andrew Howard's speech, very witty as ever, but obviously you mentioned in terms of planning applications. Clearly planning applications are quasi-judicial decisions, and members of the planning committee do need to balance out all the evidence collectively when they come to make a decision. I do have the utmost respect for our professional officers in this council and for the work that they actually undertake, given the number of applications that we receive each year, a large number of which planning committee come from the village board. I'd also like to add as well in terms of enforcement, numbers of housing enforcement have gone up. I'm sure we identified the figures that Councillor Quillen has requested. We try to cover each and every part in the strategic objective reports, but to cover every single fact, you would be a very, very long report as well. And obviously in terms of housing enforcement, I'm delighted there has been prosecutions, and we are taking a much more proactive approach. If there's any particular cases he wants to raise with me, please do email and I will follow up. Thank you.
We will now consider the first strategic theme motion. Councillor Dean, please present the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. You give me 4 minutes, I believe, which is great. Being a good Conservative, I will serve and not waste your time. I won't be bureaucratically boring like some of the speeches I've heard tonight. We started with paragraph 1 here, which is in council lingo, lingua franca, It's a Joe Swinton statement. But I'm just going to throw that out because I'm not really interested in the way the council talk. What I'm interested in is the way the people are, because we're here to represent the people rather than the council. So when any of us travel, or when other people come here, you don't need to say you're from the UK or from England or from London. You can say you're from Wimbledon or near Wimbledon. Everybody will know, fantastic. That's where they have the tennis. And straight away, Madam Mayor, they look at you, they glint in their eye, and they think you've got a nice bright smile. You'll go out in your whitey-white shorts or skirt, and you'll be playing tennis every weekend with all your wonderful friends. The fact is, although we have so many tennis courts in Merton, they are hardly used. And when they are used, people complain about the lack of quality. So what we tend to see is that some of the courts are very expensive, and there is enforcement, and then we have other courts which are either not used at all or given away for free. So there is no consistency, there is no fairness, there is no quality. And for years now, many politicians have talked about giving tennis in this borough, where essentially we have the most famous tennis courts in the whole world, at a fair price, maybe for free, across the whole of the borough. We're just not seeing that. Now, we live in an era of technology. Surely it is not beyond the width of the cabinet members' doors that they have, which I suspect will pay for. Surely it's not beyond their width to set up some sort of scheme where we can have membership of all the tennis courts throughout Merton that people could use. And that cost could be low and it could be consistent, and if we get enough people, then we get the money up front so we can put some capital to improving our tennis courts. We should not carry on where we are today, with tennis courts that are either dilapidated or empty or too expensive and not enforced. None of those are good things. And Madam Mayor, we need to change that. And therefore, this motion should be about changing the strategy, changing the attitude of this council to think this is the very, very best place in the world to play tennis, but the only people who don't get it are the residents themselves. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
This has been seconded by Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
We have two amendments and we'll deal with them in the order they were submitted. Councillor Quilliam, please move your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I think obviously the point of environment is quite clear. I'll try not to go on it too much. Firstly, the council's all well like insistence that these aren't new charges. When that's news to most people, I still find it incredibly weird that insistence seems to be continuing. And it also does slightly wind me up, and I think you guys see this on purpose now. Whenever the Tories do something on charges like this, since they were the ones proposing higher charges across the board in their budget speech before the last election. Those two issues aside, the substantive motion is welcome, and I hope our amendment is helpful in broadening it out. I think, having spoken to residents and had people come to our council's surgery about this, it's clear that there are people out there who have been using the courts for free, who won't be able to afford to do so in the same way as these charges come in. We've also seen a petition on this very issue, and I congratulate those who organised it for their work. A season ticket would no doubt help with affordability, and I think that's an idea that the council should take seriously. And I think we're pleased that at least the council and the Labour Group seem to be acknowledging that in their amendment. But I do hope councillors across the chamber agree that if families and others who've been using these courts thinking they're free and end up being priced out now, we really need to look at whether we can do something for them. So our amendment simply asks for a detailed usage study and to look at options for free use. We know from the desktop exercise done for the pitches strategy that our courts are in use at about 60% capacity at the moment. That means that there are likely times when courts could be offered for free at little to no cost to the council. So we could uncover that. I do think there's a case for free use for our courts beyond that, but let's start with the evidence and move from there. I won't take much more time on this except to say that Wimbledon, and therefore Merton, is the hub of tennis. We do ourselves a disservice if we don't do everything we can to promote tennis to our residents, and particularly to our young people. So I hope councillors across the chamber will back proposals for a season ticket and for looking at appropriate free usage of our tennis courts, so people aren't priced out. Thank you.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Gould.
I second.
Councillor Crowe, do you wish to speak now or after the Labour amendment?
After the Labour amendment.
Okay. If there are no further speakers, Councillor Dean, do you wish to use your right of reply now or after the Labour amendment?
No.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Can I have a show of hands in favour? And against? Thank you. The amendment is lost, 30 against, 26 for. We have an amendment. Councillor Morden to move.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Merton's parks are surely a pride and joy, and tennis holds a special place in the hearts of the people of our borough. Of course, the upkeep of parks and tennis courts requires significant investments, which, in the face of year-on-year cuts in Tory government funding to the local authority, has become more and more challenging to fully resource. Like the majority of London boroughs, and in line with their payment models, our park services contractor, which backing with the Lawn Tennis Association, will be introducing a more efficiently enforced pay-to-play system. Thankfully, technology has finally caught up with the desire to effectively enforce payments to facilitate which guarantees their upkeep of condition and accessibility. Madam Mayor, to make a comparison to local private tennis courts and clubs is characteristically disingenuous when they know fully well that to join a private club with an annual membership fee of £200 to £300 is far beyond the reach of most of our residents. The system of pay-to-play now able to be much more effectively enforced by online payments and codes to get into gates. It's the only way to guarantee the sustainability of public tennis in these financially restricted times, and to ensure that the borough's sport is available to all. Madam Mayor, I move the amendment.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You all know what a keen dog walker I am. I walk in several parks in Merton and occasionally in other boroughs too. What you may not know is that I was once a keen tennis player who represented a school and played for a few clubs. I don't no longer play tennis, but take an interest in the local courts when walking Archie, Clara or Tommy. Clara and Tommy being friends' dogs. No, I'm not a dog walker, just helping close friends. And as much as I love Merton Parks, please don't ask me to walk anyone else's dog. The answer is a very loud no. As a park user, I see at first hand how much our parks are loved by children and families and other dog walkers. Our parks are thriving. I suggest the proposers stop their ostrich approach, pull their heads down to the sand and face reality. Plucking figures out of the air is useless. As a result of the huge cuts from by central government administration to local authorities, we are having to prune so much and reduce costs if we are to protect our services like our lovely parks. A shame, of course, but the plain and simple fact. This is therefore the right time to update the payment system for our courts, which can be implemented and installed ready for summer 2020. It's a good time to look at introducing annual passes, and we certainly support that idea in the proposal. Madam Mayor, residents do understand that our grants are constantly reduced and realise that little is free. Our wonderful parks are free to enjoy, but the tennis courts will now cost about the same as in other boroughs. Of course, adjustments and developments may need to be made. Let us start now and refine the process, and when and as required. If we do delay until next year, the opposition will most likely present another amendment in an attempt to cause more delay. I wish the Conservatives would approach their government to fund the local authorities properly. I believe that this would be a much more fruitful use of their time. The Labour administration wishes to provide facilities which will benefit all our residents, enabling us to fund the needs of all. I support our amendment.
Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In this borough, we host the greatest tennis tournament in the world, and it is therefore entirely reasonable that residents and their elected representatives should want to see tennis thrive at all levels within the community. Reviewing the council's website, I see that excluding your weather pitches at the Harris and St Mark's academies, the council provides tennis at 13 locations across the borough, and that there are 61 tennis courts in total. Of these 11 locations operate a so-called pay-and-play basis. The court fee is £8 per hour collected by ID Verdi. However, at Wimbledon Park, which is our largest venue with 20 courts, and I understand it benefits from some financial support from the All England Club, it operates on a different basis and charges £9.20 weekdays, but £12 per hour for weekends and evenings. So in effect, residents of Wimbledon Park pay an additional 50% in relation to everybody else in the borough. This seems rather disproportionate and unfair, Madam Mayor, but there's no less than the residents of Wimbledon have come to expect from this Labour administration and their discriminatory parking taxes. Now, coming on to the pay to play, I've done a rough calculation which suggests that 1 hour on a Saturday, that's the £568 court fees collected. And if we scale that up for only 5 hours per day and 25 Saturdays per year, that amounts to £71,000. So we're talking about a lot of money. And the question is, how much should ID Verdi have collected? And the answer is, we don't know, at least I don't know, because they're not collecting the money, because they're not doing the turning up. They are itinerant fee collectors, not turning up when people have paid. It's not acceptable, Madam Mayor. It is totally wrong. Now, just returning to the issue of the Labour amendment, there's talk about financial hardship and the shortage of money. I'm amazed. I'm flabbergasted. I can't believe this is coming from a council leadership with an £11 million unexpected surplus in their budget. Some of that money could have been deployed last year to provide the residents of the borough with the tennis facilities they demand and which they deserve. I second the motion to Councillors presented. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Dean, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of points, Madam Mayor. It's very interesting when we talk about private clubs being more expensive, but for a child in many of the private clubs, it's 50 quid a year. That's 7 hours of state-run tennis. And for an adult, it starts at 100 quid a year. You get high-quality tennis. Anybody can join, and you just get on and do it. All you need to do is hand over a few pennies, which is not the same as the state-run ones. And the fact is that our tennis courts are fixed costs. So if we ever had any sort of commercial thoughts here, that there is one cost if you use them or not, and that's what's happening. So the costs are high because the revenue is low. So the return on that asset is extremely low. Now, they're underutilised and high cost because they're underutilised. What we need is to get a much lower cost, make sure they are vastly utilised. Therefore, you bring the sunshine back into tennis in a state-controlled Merton and make sure that all of those courts are used properly. And I refute everything that they've done tonight, and I think they're wrong for once.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Can I have a show of hands in favour? Thank you. And against? The amendment is carried. 431 against 26. I will now call for a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Can I have a show of hands in favour? All those in favour? All those against? Carried. We will now consider the second strategic theme motion. Councillor Holden, please present this motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move this Conservative motion tonight. We've already heard from Councillor Andrew Howard about some aspects of enforcement that is of interest to the residents of this borough and the general public at large. Enforcement is one of those public necessities to ensure that the residents can be safe, secure and happy within their surroundings. Residents in particular want to live in a sustainable community and to be treated in a way that is fair, not too harsh and draconian, nor too loose and lacking. And they want the council to ensure the services we all rely on that meet its aspiration. The key service that residents in particular want the council to enforce, the topic that we've debated in this place many times over the last few years, is the waste service contract with Veolia. Residents want the council to ensure that bins are emptied on time and without hassle, the streets to be clean and clear litter, for fly tips to be cleared promptly, and for those few that blight our streets, they want the council to educate, fine and if necessary prosecute. Veolia was supposed to be the saviour and the new hope of the Labour administration. Instead, over 2.5 years in, they have embarrassed you at every turn. There's also now a third cabinet member in as many years, who he has the dubious honour of attempting to fix the mess. I wish Councillor Barnes well, I genuinely do. Maybe he will be the breakthrough on this issue and actually enforce the contract with Veolia to ensure our streets are clean to the standard residents expect. Moreover, if he succeeds, then maybe he will get to replace the council leader, who has only offered insults and platitudes to the public who, when they dare to ask questions about the state of the streets. Madam Mayor, our motion is modest. I'm not seeking revolutionary change, but it is important that this council must act and be seen to act, especially given that both of our borough's MPs are taking an unprecedented step of writing to the Sustainable Community Scrutiny Panel. In particular, as Ron McDonald said, there has been a significant problem with refuse collection and street sweeping services in Mitcham. Additionally, Stephen Hammond added, the council has a history of poor contract management. This must improve, and a clear plan such should be subject to scrutiny. I'm therefore recommending that this council sets up a cross-party task group or an enforcement subcommittee, call it what you will, which will work with officers to deal with problem hotspots, to engage directly with the early operations team, and be involved in the contract monitoring directly itself. This is something that the residents would like. They would welcome a concerted effort from all of us across the chamber. Indeed, at the recent meeting of the Sustainable Community Panel, I was pleasantly surprised that Veolia took a more conciliatory tone for the first time, and even invited us to go and see their operations centre to see how they handle things. There was also good scrutiny of Veolia and of the administration, and it was, in my opinion, one of the better sessions of scrutiny we've had in my time in this place. So, I ask you, do not fear this motion. Let it stand, and together let's make Merton a nicer place for residents to live in, and to end the need once and for all the Mucky Merton hashtag. I move this motion.
This has been seconded by Councillor Griffin.
Reserve.
We have an amendment. Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm pleased to move the Labour amendment. Madam Mayor, 2 weeks ago I attended the Sustainable Communities Scrutiny Panel that Councillor Holden referred to talk through my priorities for the forthcoming year. I hope those present would accept that I provided a very honest assessment of the state of the service. I fully accept that some elements of the service are not working well enough in some parts of the borough, but I think it is right to note that it is not all elements and it is not every part of the borough. Furthermore, whilst I accept the contract has, in parts of the borough, not resulted in a cleaner public realm, I think it is right to note that it has delivered against two of the other objectives, namely financial savings and increased recycling rates. However, I don't say any of that to excuse the failings that are occurring, because a cleaner borough has to be the ultimate objective of any waste contract, and I am clear that we are not achieving against that objective at present. Madam Mayor, I think it is helpful to compartmentalise the three elements of our waste contract when talking through some of the challenges: curbside collection, fly tipping, and street cleansing. On the curbside collection, whilst the overall number of miscollections is still too high, and I am clear it is still too high, it has stabilised considerably since the service change last October and is now broadly comparable to that achieved 12 months ago. The challenges that remain, predominantly collection from flats above shops and in some communal estate collections, are as much for the council as they are for the area, and I am committed to working with officers to address these in the coming months. On fly tipping, it is right to acknowledge that the area's performance in clearing reported fly tips is good, albeit I accept that there are probably a number which go unreported due to the slightly cumbersome nature of our reporting mechanism. The real challenge though lies in deterring and preventing fly tips from occurring in the first place, rather than removing them after the event, which is a key focus for us in the coming months, utilising all of the tools outlined in our recently published fly tipping strategy. There are also areas which I believe could lead to relatively quick wins to help improve cleanliness, like the recent review of the neighbourhood recycling centres and forthcoming review of street bins, both of which can attract fly tips and excess refuse. And that, Madam Mayor, brings me to street cleansing, which to my mind is the area in which the contract is currently performing least satisfactorily. Last month, I spent half a day with Veolia and officers visiting different parts of the borough to look at the state of the streets, and I think it was accepted by all parties that on a number of roads that we visited, the performance was nowhere near as good as it needed to be. I'm very pleased that on the back of that visit, Veolia has committed to creating an improvement plan on street cleansing, which was a promise reiterated at scrutiny 2 weeks ago, and I hope that will result in an improved street signal. Madam Mayor, I am currently working with officers on the development of an immersion programme encompassing elements from across different directorates, all of which have a bearing on the cleanliness of our borough. As I alluded to earlier, invitations will shortly be going out to all councillors to attend a further round of workshops organised by Collection Day, and I am keen to receive feedback as part of those workshops on the fly tipping strategy and broader clean immersion programme, and indeed on some of those other elements alluded to by Councillor Holden. Madam Mayor, I fully understand the level of frustration felt by colleagues and residents at the way the service is currently operating, I am absolutely committed to working with all colleagues to address these challenges and create the cleaner borough we all aspire to see. I formally move the amendment.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Irons.
Madam Mayor, though I'd simply like to say what he said, sit down, I won't. Instead, I'll address the part of this motion that makes reference to the Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Panel, which I chair. The panel I chair is a collaborative one, made up of members from across the political spectrum. We bring councillors, officers and partners together to look at specific areas of work and make recommendations to Cabinet. But crucially, we have a procedure that allows our residents to make constructive contributions to our work. The rules are clear. Part 4E, the Council's Constitution specifies that political parties and non-political groups shall not be entitled to use this procedure. As Chair, it is important that I uphold these guidelines. They prevent the work of the panel from being derailed by political speeches from ambitious councillors in search of a platform. They prevent chairs from filling the room with sympathetic councillors wishing to pat the leadership on the back. And they prevent egocentric councillors stealing our residents' seats at the scrutiny table. At our last meeting on the 3rd of September, we focused on Veolia's performance. We heard from 5 resident speakers, received written submissions from Mitchell Morden MP Siobhan McDonough, Wimbledon MP Stephen Hammond, Clarion Housing and resident associations from both the east and the west of the borough. As a panel, we agreed on the questions we wanted answers to, organised our thoughts in a pre-meeting and structured our questioning around these key things. Waste collections from large estates and flats above shops, street cleaning, reporting and communication. As a result, our recommendations to Cabinet go further than those laid out in this Conservative motion. They include specific points around creating an always-on communication strategy, a review of how collections are managed on large estates, and that Cabinet will investigate the feasibility of a ward-by-ward deep clean. We reached this cross-party consensus without the need of an additional subcommittee. We reached this consensus through collaboration and a commitment to focus on the evidence and not the politics. In short, we reached this consensus by properly engaging with the scrutiny process. So, Madam Mayor, with this in mind, the issue here is not the scrutiny process and whether or not we need more meetings. The issue here is how we use the existing scrutiny process to ensure the best service for our residents with the limited resources we have. As more and more councillors are driven to their financial breaking point by ideological warfare on their budgets, more and more services are likely to face outsourcing. To ensure these companies do not simply privatise their profits and let the public own their failures, we have to change our approach to how we scrutinise their performance. We have to move beyond political combat amongst ourselves and towards a united force fighting for the best interests of our residents. So instead of attacking scrutiny, I would ask our colleagues to engage with the process. Because when we are not grandstanding for the cameras, when we are not sniping at each other, when we are not using the threat of political action against chairs because they prioritise resident speakers over councillors, we find real solutions to real issues and we get the work done. Thank you.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate that it's a central point of being Conservative. You look back towards the past with reverence. But I read this motion and it seemed to me that we were back in September 2018 when the Conservative group did in fact put forward pretty much this motion then. In broad terms, we support what this motion is trying to do, although we think it could be done in a slightly better way. I'll come on to the Labour amendment as well. I think Councillor Holden and Madam Mayor is wrong to say call it what you will. I think there is a different vehicle. We took advice from the monitoring officer back in September 2018 that there was a different way of doing it. It was less political, meeting some of the points that Councillor Ryan made. We want something that's cross-party, which is forward-looking, rather than just talking to certain councils and using political points, and which is why last September we proposed instead a scrutiny task group that wouldn't be bound by political proportionality to non-council MPs, and why we suggested that it gave you some specific issues and improvements, like the training and supporting of officers that manage the earlier contract and look at problem areas from a resident point of view, like assisted collections, reporting complaints, things like that. We also suggested that we could look at the cost and legal process to help prepare to come out of the contract, if that was what was needed. And that's what the Conservative group also supports, although strangely they didn't put themselves to back our amendment back then. Now in February we talked about this again at the extraordinary meeting, extraordinary in a number of ways, about waste, where we proposed that the Cabinet commission a detailed evidence-based review of the Council and South London Waste Partnership processes in managing and monitoring the waste management services, particularly in relation to the existing contract with Veolia. During the review, information and evidence could be taken from health officers, external bodies and organisations, including other waste partnership boroughs and members of the public to help them understand the key issues and areas for improvement. And that's why we can't support the Labour amendment, which essentially restores the status quo. Madam Mayor, I really appreciate the efforts that Councillor Irons is going to with the Sustainable Communities Power. She's doing a really good job. The pre-meeting was great. It's a shame it was just you and I. Our fellows from these benches didn't bring themselves to attend. But probably got the job done. Contractual disputes need to be resolved, and there are things that the Council could do when a cross-party approach could work. And we need to learn and look at what works. Merton must get better at being Council and Commission services rather than one that provides services directly. Thank you, Madam
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, we've heard a lot about the earlier contract tonight and the claims that it should be properly managed and scrutinised, but I think it's worth looking at a few examples that just reflect how the Council administration is actually doing nothing at all to manage or enforce the contracts. During the summer, Madam Mayor, the Conservative group was happy to visit Colliers Wood and speak to residents there. And what we saw there was a high street with fly tipping in 3 or 4 locations, and residents approached us on the streets and said it hadn't been cleared for weeks on the bit. We walked down Park Road and the streets off there, and there were 6 inches of detritus, and residents approached us and said they haven't seen so many streets in the streets there, sweep in the streets there for many months. There was litter all around the streets there. We put in a complaint and we received a complaint from the Cabinet that we shouldn't interfere in the management of the early contract. They were happy to let the contractor sweep or not sweep the streets as they were doing, and they didn't want to see any improvement. I'm glad to see that the excellent officers of this Council, Madam Mayor, have actually put a project in place at our request as a Conservative group to try and get the early to improve their performance in Colliers Wood. Madam Mayor, over the weekend I reported fly tipping and dirty streets strewn with litter, Grade D standards just off Durnsford Road. The contract standards are very clear that they will be cleared within 24 hours and the street will be brought up to Grade A standard. I inspected that road myself at 8 AM this morning, Madam Mayor. The fly tipping was still in place, and all the pavement was strewn with litter. No attempt whatsoever had been made to clean the streets at all, and that just shows and reflects the lack of management that this Labour administration is delivering in relation to the early contracts. There's waterside rain in Woodland Park, Madam Mayor. There's fly tipping, which is in some areas 2 or 3 feet deep, hasn't been cleaned in well over a year. The residents who pass through that area to prevent the Morden trail have been reporting that street for a long period of time, and still it hasn't been cleaned. Anyone who drives down Plough Lane, Madam Mayor, will see the bins on accessing the Morden trail. It's very rare to see them empty. Usually when you drive past them, Madam Mayor, or walk by, you'll see the bins are overflowing. And that's the same in many areas of our borough. Nobody is managing this contract properly, Madam Mayor. And when we attended the scrutiny session, which Councillor Ryan refers to at the beginning of September, what we heard was there was a lack of clarity, supposedly, in the contract. And it always amazes me, Madam Mayor, when people say there's a lack of clarity in this contract. And Siobhan McDonough said there was a lack of SLAs and KPIs, and it wasn't sufficiently clear what the service level of the contract. But it's absolutely clear that none of them actually read the contract. So they pick the contract up, they see there are actually hundreds of pages of clear DEFRA service standards of what Councillor Allison, when he pays the earlier the £5 to £10 million a year, so happily, it says very clearly what the contract standard is, and that's Grade A, Grade B DEFRA. It says there will never be no discipline. It says fly tipping will always be cleared within 24 hours. No one in the Council administration is managing these properly. And what we've heard is a long list of other excuses that Veolia is still learning how to clean the streets, despite the fact that it's been sweeping the streets since 1953 and 1980s in this country. We've heard that the council is not paying Veolia enough money, despite the fact that Councillor Allison has been so generous with his chequebook, Madam Mayor. He wishes to pay Veolia even more money. He's now looking at ways to pay Veolia extra money to clear waste from the side of the streets, which in my opinion, if you read the contract, Veolia are already clearly liable to be paid. We also heard complaints of the scrutiny group that residents were being hypercritical. And that was a disgraceful statement that the scrutiny group and even Veolia were there with cascading residents, chaired by Councillor Rhines, for daring to criticise the state of the streets and the performance of the contract. And we also saw reports, Madam Mayor, that 0% were on. Madam Mayor, this contract is of course a copy of the property. Thank you.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Holden, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, that was a very interesting sort of speech by colleagues and opposition members as well. Councillor Byers talked a lot of good sense, and I do generally wish him well in his endeavours. But I don't recognise the characterisation by Councillor Byers about the scrutiny meeting. I thought last time he did very well, and it was generally collegiate, well organised. We got something through the cabinet member which hasn't normally happened before. So I don't know where you're getting your assertions from. As for Councillor Fairclough mentioned the premium that we had, it was at a time of year when most people are away, and as I had made clear to chair that committee, I was away attending a funeral, which is why I had to miss that event at short notice. So it's worth checking before you're making nasty aspersions about why people aren't here to care. We generally do care. I was stuck elsewhere for a family event, and Councillor Dean had also been to attend to work for the Indeed. So, anyway, in terms of our motion, the reason we keep bringing stuff like this back in various forms of fashion is because it is still an issue. And as a resident DPK asset, it's still the number one thing I've received in my inbox, and I suspect it is in my colleagues. Until it's resolved properly, we will keep going back at this. That's why we call it a task group this time, a more continuous one, because it doesn't need one-off actions. I think we need a continuous sort of subgroup. I don't even mind if it's set full of just members of one party. It doesn't have to be a normal style task group. It's just a few individuals who spend more action and energy, a bit like however sort of dating person in our community, we could have a couple of people doing this. It's a bit like the financial monitoring task group. That means they're quite often, regularly. This could be the equivalent. This could be the Union contract management sort of task group, whatever you want to call it. So I think this is a fair motion. I've done nothing revolutionary.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment first. Can I have a show of hands in favour? And against? All those against? Thank you. The amendment is carried. 34 for, 23 against. I will now call for a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Not agreed. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. We will now consider the third strategic theme of the motion. Councillor Fairclough, please present this motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to propose this morning's motion, managing engine behaviour to promote cleaner air. This year, Madam Mayor, there's been a significant amount of focus on the Council's plans to improve air quality, largely with debates that have raged over parking strategy. Now, I won't talk about those. I'm going to talk about something that's hopefully less controversial. Action against engine idling is necessary and effective. It's reducing the instances where drivers leave a vehicle's engine running while it's stationary. Now, research suggests that car engine idling produces up to 150 billion exhaust emissions from the heat containing harmful chemicals like cyanide and other harmful gases. Now, at Action 59 of the Council's Air Quality Action Plan suggests that an anti-idling enforcement strategy will be rolled out in September 2018 again. And in answer to a public question at the full council meeting on air quality in February, the cabinet member suggested that an anti-idling enforcement strategy would be ready later this year. So we've been hopeful. And yet here we are at full council on enforcement, but there's no mention of it in the strategic review report. And we thought that was a bit of a missed opportunity, and we hoped that we could bring forward this motion to prompt some action. We know from Councillor Holden's good question earlier that hundreds of anti-idling signs have been installed across the borough. Although in my own ward I found that there's a long delay between agreements having been put up and actually having them fitted. And then they need some on-the-ground support through civil enforcement officers. So we're hoping that through this motion we can ensure those plans come forward sooner rather than later. Now in March these ideas were being promoted by Public Health England, and lots of other councils of all political persuasions have already implemented them. So there's a good evidence base to learn from. We've got something to look at. It's also good timing, as the council is procuring this enforcement service provider, and there's going to be a change in focus, as we can see from Para 4.9 of the strategic theme report, and we think that anti-idling enforcement will be one of those areas put into that contract. We think there's a great opportunity to work with the council's contractors and TfL in this area, developing these relationships, which are actually hugely important across a number of fields, not just here with anti-idling, but in things like the climate emergency task force. And what's good about the powers here to take action is that the fining power doesn't kick in unless drivers refuse to turn their engines off. And so there could be a role for volunteers and education and raising awareness amongst drivers. And it could be particularly effective in areas around schools, for example. I think it's a simple motion, a straightforward motion, Madam Mayor. I hope across the chamber there's some indication that there is support across the chamber and no amendments put forward. So I hope we can maybe even have a unanimous vote. Who knows? Who knows that it will be faster than my proposal. Anyway, Madam Mayor, I propose the motion. Thank you.
This is being seconded by Councillor McGrath.
Madam Mayor, levels of air pollution are an issue that, as we all know, are of great concern to our residents. But individuals often feel powerless to make much difference. But we all know that without a commitment from each of us, nothing will change. And we also know that the evidence for the effects on pollution, affecting health, particularly of children, but of everybody in our borough, seems to be in the papers almost every day. Many people driving in Merton will be using vehicles which pollute our air, and we can't expect them to instantly change. But we can ask them to behave in a way which minimises the pollution that their vehicles put out. So we come to this motion. We've all seen cars and trucks with their engines on when they don't need to be, and this motion seeks to address that. We don't pretend in the Lib Dem group to know all the answers, and that's why we're asking that we would like the Cabinet to consult widely and put together plans in the three areas. No idling schools near zones and making better use of our enforcement officers, looking at training volunteers to collect evidence, and working with our contractors. Madam Mayor, this is an area where we can only be effective if we take people with us. So we hope that the other parties will support us, because polluted air affects all of us, independents, Tories and Labour, as well as us Lib Dems. So I would urge members to support the motion.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's good to see Liberal Democrats vote on idling in Merton. It must make a welcome change in the past few days spent idling on the reach of the former, trying to think of new ways to show they are neither Liberal nor Democrats. Although it does feel somewhat nostalgic that even in their bold new era, the Liberal Democrats will so strongly make a case for a long-standing Conservative policy, one that this group has long argued for. It's for that reason that we will support the motion tonight. This administration, Madam Mayor, will apply the lies that inflict poor air quality on its residents. Poor air quality, as we know, is the biggest environmental risk to public health in the UK, and leaving engines running while stationary is simply a necessary source of air pollution. I would tell you that every minute an idling car produces enough exhaust emissions to fill 150 billions of harmful chemicals, but it seems Council Fair Club and I have read the same briefing. The pollution can result in a range of health problems, from heart and lung disease to strokes and cancer, and is shown to be particularly damaging to children. Yet, as it does so on so many issues, the Council has the power to change things but chooses not to do so. And is so often the case, whilst this council prefers to do the bare minimum passively, other councils take action, innovate and enforce. In Westminster, for example, where motorists who leave their engines idling while stationary are issued with an £80 fine, a scheme that the borough started all the way back in February 2017. There, drivers of cars, vans, coaches and taxis will pay a fixed penalty notice if caught idling for more than a minute well parked up. Of course, drivers should first be encouraged to switch their engines off, and educating them about how pollution affects health is important. But unless enforcement then follows, this will have little or no impact. Unless this happens, we will continue to blight every ward in our borough with poor air quality. In Hillside, as Councillor Holden's already said, where the lines of taxis and Alexandra Road pump pollution into residents' homes. In Abbey, where the safe Wimbledon Junction high pedestrian footfall is mixed with vehicles idling from all directions. In West Barnes and other wards, where cars sit for minutes at level crossings with engines idling. And in Mitchell and Morden, where once again Labour take their residents' votes and their health for granted. Of course, most worrying is the pollution in the Merton schools, which will clearly be the priority for no island home of the motion proposals. We have the opportunity to have a generation of children brought to the borough free from the scourge and the harms of air pollution. Madam Mayor, we are pleased to support this motion and I hope its successful passing will see air quality in the borough finally tackle.
Thank you, Madam. I'm pleased to say that the administration will also be supporting this motion, and I would like to thank those who moved it for the helpful and constructive way in which it was drafted. Madam Mayor, in tackling idling, it is important that we recognise that we do need to strike a balance between education and enforcement. In regard to the former, we will shortly be holding the previously advertised training session for all councillors who expressed an interest, which will enable them to run campaign events in their own wards. I would hope that as we undertake more of these events and continue to increase our signage, our anti-idling campaign does, to a degree, become self-enforcing as the actions we start to take begin to drive behaviour change. We successfully bid for monies through the Mayor's Air Quality Action Fund for this purpose, so we will be able to do far more. However, as Councillor Fairclough has alluded to, there is undoubtedly a role for enforcement, and indeed work is already underway to utilise parking enforcement officers to undertake a dual enforcement role during school drop-off and pick-up times, receiving training and resources from our air quality officers. Other than schools, there are a number of areas that I would like to see us particularly focus on, as mentioned in my response to Councillor Holden earlier. But I think we need to recognise that different measures will likely be needed in different areas. And to that end, I will be discussing with officers commissioning a piece of work which looks at a holistic strategy to tackle anti-idling across the borough, with different measures utilised in different areas and learning from best practice from other boroughs, some of which Councillor Barlow has alluded to. Madam Mayor, as part of that strategy, I'm very happy to put all of the measures put forward in this motion, and indeed any other suggestions colleagues have, I'm very happy to support this motion.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Fairclough, do you wish to use your right of reply?
Yes, Madam Mayor, just to say thank you very much to all sides and we look forward to a successful strategy. Thank you.
The motion is agreed.
Agreed.
Now the debate is finished, we'll move to a vote on the substantive report. Is the report agreed or would you like a vote?
Agreed.
Item 8, Rains Park Community Forum. Councillor Fairclough?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To move the report very briefly, there were 30 or so attendees, both officers and councillors. A great discussion about local issues in Rains Park, mainly about waste and the present rubbish from flats and large shops. The next one is actually tomorrow, so I encourage anyone with an interest in finding out what the residents of the Rains Park area would like to think and like to discuss. We'll come along. Thank you very much.
Item 9, Wimbledon Community Forum. Councillor Holmes?
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. 20 residents and councillors gathered at the Community Forum and we discussed street cleaning and we had an update from Love Wimbledon and we also discussed neighbourhood plan. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
We now move to the Liberal Democrat motion. Councillor Kohler, please move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In answer to Councillor Barlow's point, we did enjoy our time in Bournemouth and much time to be idle. Of course, we're meeting too many new friends from the Tory party and the Labour Party who joined us. Police in the UK is in crisis. During Theresa May's stewardship of the Home Office at number 10, we lost over 20,000 police officers, 600 police stations, over 100 in London, including 36 that Civic closed last year. The 37th was, of course, Wimbledon police station that was saved by my legal action, supported by Merton.TV and residents from across the political spectrum in Wimbledon and beyond. I would remind colleagues in front of me and across the aisle, you told us we were wasting our time, but it was that action that ensured Wimbledon Station was saved temporarily, and now it looks for the long-term future. Now, if I was brave or foolhardy enough to read Councillor Dean's mind, I'd probably be hearing him saying, what about Boris Johnson's pledge? And yes, there's some merit in that. He might have lost 6 votes, 2 cabinet ministers, his majority, and let's not forget Wimbledon's MP, but Boris Johnson appears to have found the legendary magic money tree, or perhaps snuck into Jeremy Corbyn's allotment and stolen his one. Overnight, we've been promised 20,000 extra police officers to make up the 1,000 cut by Theresa May. It would, of course, be churlish to complain. But within that easy promise lies a wealth of questions and doubts, not least where we're going to put the ones beyond Wimbledon now Theresa May and Civic can't close all the police stations. More to the point, we're talking about the promise of a proven liar, no eye for detail, a man with little grasp of reality who heads a minority government who can't get anything through Parliament. Someone who, in the face of his repeated failure to win a vote, has closed the damn thing down. So that's why we're suggesting the Council investigate using some of last year's 11 million surplus to invest in more police officers via MOPAC's Partnership Plus scheme. But here a such a lesson comes. As you will know, I was the person who asked the Borough Commander last week whether that would help, and she said at the moment, no, we can't get enough trained officers. That does not undermine this motion, though. So what we're asking you to do as a council and as a cabinet is to investigate the possibility once the training issue is addressed. The point is, until central government comes up with the necessary funds, there will be a shortage of community policing, and we need those. Our voters, our communities, and our borough deserve nothing less. Thank you.
This, I believe, is being seconded by Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally second this motion. I believe the children of Merton deserve to feel they can stay safe, and I ask that the council listen to the young people when they say there needs to be a better relationship with the police and more police on the streets. The police are being asked, as part of the children and young people's plan, to continue to work with partners to reduce crime and violence in the community on top of their extended workload. They work with many children who are on the Child Protection Plan, those children that need help if they are considered at risk of child sexual abuse, and also referrals to prevent services with those children at risk of radicalisation in Merton. We need to invest in young people. The majority of criminals in prison have suffered growing up with domestic abuse and have suffered childhood trauma. Putting criminals in prison doesn't work. Many will go on to reoffend on release if we do not invest in rehabilitation. The threat of being caught is a far-ranging deterrent. This is why we need more police on our streets and in our communities. I would also like to take this opportunity to recognise the hard work and commitment that Sandra and Robin, our safer neighbourhood officers, deliver to our Camp Hill community. Because of government cuts, there are now only 2 officers in most ward teams. Crime is at the forefront of people's minds during the Camp Hill by-election, as there had been a spate of local robberies. Only one team was planning to make this issue a priority. Policing requires community intelligence, and although Robin and Sandra in Cannon Hill do a great
great job, radical action needs to be taken to boost the number of local police. Better resourced teams will be able to spend more time in the community where it matters most. I would like the Council to demonstrate a commitment to the children and young people across Merton and pass this motion to increase the number of police on our streets. Thank you.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Southgate?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I do recognise the concerns lying behind this motion. At least I did until I listened to Councillor Keller speak. It seems to have rained over a lot of other ground too. But it has rather been overtaken by recent events. Based on the Borough Commander's appearance before the Open Scrutiny Commission last week, the BCU is getting close to its full complement of 1,462 officers and staff. There are 95 outstanding vacancies, but 46 of those will be filled by officers who are currently at training college. So that figure in the motion of a 19% decrease in police numbers needs to be revised. It's certainly not as high as that now. But until the BCU is operating at full strength, the Borough Commander has made it clear she would not welcome a request for additional council-funded officers under the MOPAC scheme. In fairness, Council Keller acknowledges this, because she could only find those funded officers by taking them from other areas of policing, which would be counterproductive. The motion also suggests that Merton was the fourth safest borough in London is at risk of losing officers to other boroughs within the BCU with higher crime rates. Now, I don't want to undermine that fourth safest borough claim, but the trends in the most recent figures we looked at last week for Merton do not make for happy reading. Overall, total notified offences are up 5% in Merton for the year to date. That compares with an insignificant 0.4% increase in Richmond, an actual decrease, 2.3% in Morden. So no reason for complacency there, and no reason to have officers diverted to another part of the BCU. If I look at Knife, we must surely all be concerned about this. Merton's figure is 20% up, whereas Wandsworth is 13% down, and for the Met area as a whole, knife crime is marginally down by 1%. So plenty to concern us there. While we're on the subject of knife crime, let's not forget the 4 stabbings at the Eastern Electrics event. Let's resolve never to let that happen again. The cost of policing for that weekend was an extra £100,000, a cost they cannot recover from the organisers. So, let's resolve not to put them in that position again, and let's resolve not to put our own community in that position. Thank you.
We have 2 amendments, and we will deal with them in the order they were submitted. Councillor McLean, please move your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm pleased to be proposing this amendment. Madam Mayor, as others have mentioned, at the Open Scrutiny Commission held last week, the Borough Commander, Chief Superintendent General, confirmed that she would currently not support the Pilot Plus scheme in Merton, as it would lead to a reduction in the number of emergency response officers. As such, what is the point of this Liberal Democrat motion? If it is to increase police numbers in Merton, then it fails. Our amendment gives it substance. Madam Mayor, when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, knife crime fell by 50%, in part because he put more police officers on the street. That is why this Conservative government are pledging to recruit 20,000 more police officers to keep knives off our streets and protect our communities. 20,000 new police officers that are in addition to current recruitment levels, as confirmed by the Borough Commander. A Conservative policy that has led to a re-evaluation of the Metropolitan Police State Management Strategy, a real opportunity to save on the Wood Police Station. A lifeline that does not rely on correction in a consultation process, but a Conservative policy to save on the Wood Police Station. Because the Labour Party won't. It is their London Mayor who instigated the closure, and it is this Labour-led administration that has done nothing to reverse the decision. The Liberal Democrats can't. They can argue over the validity of consultations, over how they love process. But as they have found with the parking charge call-in, their actions come to nothing. Labour won't, the Liberal Democrats can't. It is the Conservatives that can save Woodwood Police Station. Madam Mayor, along with the increase in police must also ensure that the police have the right powers, in particular to stop knives and acids ending up on our streets. That is why the government has introduced the Offensive Weapons Act, which will give police extra powers to take dangerous weapons out of criminals' hands and deter those involved in knife crime. I welcome this act, the Conservative group welcomes this act, and I suspect the Labour group welcomes this act, but disgracefully not Councillor Kohler and the Liberal Democrat group. For Madam Mayor, at the Liberal Democrat conference yesterday, Councillor Kohler spoke to a motion which was passed in favour of reducing stop and search, ending mandatory sentencing for possessing a knife or acid, and ending most prison sentences for women. The mendacious heart of the Liberal Democrats exposed, along with Councillor Kohler's poor judgment. Just one knife seized in a stop and search could be one life saved. By backing plans to limit the police's ability to tackle crime, they are confirming they are soft on crime. Yet again, they draw from both sides of the same mouth. Madam Mayor, in City Hall we have a Labour Mayor who prioritises PR over policing to the detriment of Londoners. In this chamber we have Merton Labour who continues to support Civic, even though since he came to office knife crime has increased by 52%, burglary by 17% and robbery by 59%. And Liberal Democrat councillors who seek to weaken the abilities of our police and by extension make our communities less safe. Madam Mayor, if we Conservatives by our actions, and policies, have created the only opportunity to save Wimbledon Police Station. It is we Conservatives who will provide the police with new officers and enhanced powers to protect our communities.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Simpson.
Well, Madam Mayor, thank you. I'm delighted to second this Conservative amendment proposed by Councillor McVeigh. Madam Mayor, whilst members of other parties will shout austerity, let us firstly remember that it was the current Labour Mayor who tore up the budgetary expenditure on the Metropolitan Police when he succeeded Boris Johnson, putting lives of Londoners at greater risk, as has been shown by the increase in knife crime across the country. It was a crude political gesture aimed at embarrassing the government into giving more money. It failed, so we have less police, a loss of senior officers with experience, and a mayor who continues to pay lip service rather than putting his money where his mouth is, preferring instead to increase the staff of City Hall than putting mortgage on the police. And so to this Liberal Democrat motion proposed by Councillor Kohler, well, the fresh air he's had embracing the air of Bournemouth seems to have quite upset his equilibrium, I would say. Where he extraordinarily spoke in support of reducing stop and search and made a plan for the Metropolitan Police Commission policy and ending mandatory sentences for possessing knives or acid. I mean, you've got to start to ask which planet this council is really on. So after the Fib Dems continue to show that they're part of mixing and fiction, such as the campaign to save all the police station of Dunway that they climbed onto when the hard graft of petitioning the Mayor of London had already been done by Stephen Hammond and the local Conservatives, who presented a petition of over 5,000 signatures to City Hall, and they were trying to pretend that they were the only group who could save Wimbledon Police Station. Moving on, let us look at the new investment pot in police numbers by the government. 20,000 more police nationwide, and that will bring up to 6,000 more officers to the net. Only this afternoon, Madam Mayor, the Boku commander's words to the safer neighbourhood were, but bored were, I haven't felt so confident in the future for a long time. Just listen to those words again. I haven't felt so confident in the future for a long time. Police numbers are back to over 30,000. We are recruiting 400 officers a month, and this has nothing to do with the 20,000 new officers promised by the government, of which it is hoped 6,000 will come to the net. This will be the best opportunity to save Wimbledon Police Station, with an increase in officers and support staff needing to be housed. It was also made clear at the recent Labour Review scrutiny meeting that the Partnership Plus scheme, as already been said by Councillor McLean, if implemented in Merton, would lead to a reduction in our local emergency response team. Madam Mayor, this is an ill thought out notion that can only make sense by council supporting our very reasonable and constructive amendments.
Councillor Kerr, do you wish to reply now or after the Labour amendment?
Where do I start? I'll wait for the Labour amendment as well.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Can I have a show of hands in favour? Thanks. And against? And those not voting? The amendment is lost. 416 against 38, 3 not voting. I'll now turn to the Labour amendment. Councillor Macaulay, please now move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm quite happy to move the amendment as the cabinet member for Community Safety. The amendment motion for extra police officers on Martin Street must take a priority for all of our residents in the borough as elected members to ensure their safety. At the Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting last Wednesday, the borough commander, Sally Benton, was present at the meeting and she gave a brief overview of any changes since she last attended previously in April this year. She also addressed several questions identified by Commission members. Some of the questions were emailed in advance of the meeting so that she had a chance to prepare all the answers. The borough commander gave an update stating that crime levels have stabilized and officer vacancies are down following a number of new officers joining BCU. We are all aware that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has pledged another 20,000 police for the UK. The Met estimates that 5,000 will come to London and not 6,000 as intimated by Councillor Simpson, with some 3,000 to neighbourhood policing. The details remain unknown. At the Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting, it was stated that the boroughs in the BCU have not used the MOPAC scheme to provide council-funded police officers. And the borough commander clearly advised that this is not an option and would not be counterproductive because the council buying police officers would result in taking BCU officers from other teams. Council therefore believes that due to the crime rates of the enlarged BCU, the decrease in overall police numbers could have a disproportionate effect on police numbers across Merton. And as you can see, what is happening in London in terms of night crime, and also the cost of policing should lie on the government's door as a result of the ongoing cuts which the government has made. This has resulted in a reduction in police number in Merton, and our communities have suffered considerably over the last few years, i.e. by not seeing bodies on the beat, especially our older communities in the borough. This has also had a drastic effect on the costs made by central government during the Met funding. We also see that the MD Commissioner Morden has held several events in Regional Town Centre asking for more bodies on the beat, and people we have spoken to have intimated to us that they do not feel secure, especially older people and also younger people in the borough are frightened at night to go out under the age of 16 to 18.
As a protocol is to our services, imagine we have continued to put pressure on the government to reverse the rate funding cuts of more than 1 billion and to continue to work with the BCU Chief Superintendents and Director to identify areas of greatest needs to ensure that the Southwest BCU have no officers. Madam Mayor, I therefore support the amendment motion.
Can I make a point of clarification, please? There was actually 6,000 police officers was an answer in written questions from OSC, so it actually appears in the OSC papers. Cabinet members should know that. Thank you.
Noted. The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, this is quite an extraordinary motion, isn't it? The reason I'm so opposed to the amended version is because, like many people, I have the privilege of sitting on the Overview and Scrutiny Commission and the Financial Capacity. Therefore, it gives me a clear view of three areas. The evidence given by the Borough Commander, the delivery of our safe Merton strategy, and the strain upon our medium-term financial strategy. Councillors Macaulay, Southgate and Cole have all said, although talking about the evidence given, the Chief Superintendent was utterly unambiguous in a recommendation that we didn't use the MOFAC. Right? But it doesn't mention this in the motion, and you've been left to have a caveat in your speech after the fact. If you're prepared to wait until they're fully trained, wait till then, until you put the motion forward. It's quite simple, right? The second point is that in the same meeting, Neil Thurlow, our head of community safety, was asked about the causes of crime. He responded that it was a complex issue that had multiple causes and could not be separated from wider community social policy issues. This was a view supported by a parliamentary report earlier this year that specifies that rising crime could be linked to budget cuts that have decimated youth services. With research by the actual Home Office itself warning of a lost generation of children being created by austerity. There, I've used the word. What is clear from all of this is that the answer to crime doesn't come from stripping away further key social services in order to pay for police. It is the national government's responsibility to fund police. This is an evidence-based view that I expect the Liberal Democrats to share, not to ignore. Finally, everyone here knows and understands the current projected strain on our finances. We all know its causes. It's been spoken of tonight, even by the Tories. So while the Liberal Democrats have opted for, to use your words, a magic money tree motion, it is beyond me why they should expect us to cut services so critical to pay for it. Unless, of course, Madam Mayor, that they know this motion is going to fail, and that motion's sole purpose is to play a yellow-blue conflict in Wimbledon with a general election coming up. So they can seem both strong on policing, but yet conveniently liberal where appropriate. If that is the case, that's just not good enough reason for any motion, let alone a council policy. And it is for that reason I second this amendment.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Kohler, do you wish to use your right of reply?
How long do I have? Yes, please. How long do I have? Oh, goodness. Okay, a few corrections of fact. The 90% decrease refers to the fact that when the BCU was created, the sum total of the four boroughs and the total complement in the one BCU of the four boroughs is 90% lower. So there's a 90% decrease by our full complement. On the 6,000 figure, the Borough Commander did not say the Met were getting 6,000 extra police. She said she hoped they were. She thought they might. It was not confirmed. On Councillor Pritchard's point, as we should know, the motion was of course submitted before we had met with the Borough Commander. I then quizzed her about it so that we could have some evidence in our discussions. With regard to Councillor McLean's bizarre speech, only the Tories have cut 21,000 officers, promised to bring back 20,000, and tell the world they're increasing the number of police officers. Does he not realise that the police station is only open because my legal action succeeded? I don't recall his petition being raised in the court proceedings. Boris Johnson talks a lot about the fact that knife crime went down under his watch. You know what also went down under his watch? Stop and search. There is no evidence of increasing suspicion that stop and search has any effect on knife crime. And we are against suspicionless stop and search because it alienates certain communities within society. I make no apologies for that. With regard to mandatory sentences, we trust the judges. Ask any lawyer, mandatory sentences are never a good idea because you create injustice. We trust our judges. I did it all within 2 minutes. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Can I have a show of hands in favour? And against? And those not voting? The amendment is carried 31 for, 23 against and 3 not voting. I will now call for a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Can I have a show of hands in favour? Thank you. And against? Thanks. And not voting. The motion is carried. We now have the next motion. Councillor Attawar, please move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It may be 100 years since women got the vote, and since then society has changed beyond recognition, with many more opportunities for all. And yes, many may feel that many of the equalities issues have been addressed, and that there isn't much to do. But sadly, as I take on this new role, I realise that although much of this work is already being done by this council and ahead of many councils in this country, there is still so much more that needs to be done. While this is the most forward piece of work to be undertaken by this Labour group, we in this Labour administration want to ensure councillors' conditions are expanded upon and brought in line with council employees. This piece of work, drafted by the LGA Labour Group's Women's Task Force, gives all councillors an entitlement to parental leave after giving birth or adopting. It also gives the full range of rights in the policy reflected in the Constitution when the Members' Allowances Scheme is renewed in February 2020. This is an exciting opportunity to look not only at redressing the gender balance on the Council, but also at the terms and conditions for current and future councillors. It is important to do all we can to get more people involved and engaged in the democratic process. This motion, I feel, does just that. It will not only encourage more people from different backgrounds to become engaged within the political process, but also get involved and onto the council. This is why I am working with Democracy Services to put a paper together looking at improving internal conditions for councillors and the training opportunities for members with a specific focus on issues such as unconscious bias. Everyone is capable of discriminatory behaviour and it must be addressed. This paper will then go to the Standards Committee and cross-party backbenchers will have the opportunity to scrutinise it and feed into the paper. This is why we are happy to accept the Lib Dem amendment to review how councillors are more representative of our residents. We feel in Labour we have come a long way on this and we want other parties to make progress too. We will, however, not be accepting the Tory amendment, as we feel it weakens our proposals, but we are happy that they are moving in the right direction. I am proud that in the Labour group in Merton we have achieved that 50-50 split in councillor representation and also in the cabinet. I feel it is important to improve representation across the board for elected members, and with this motion I hope to achieve that change. I move this motion.
This, I believe, is being seconded by Councillor Morden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm delighted to second Cabinet Member for Women and Equality's maiden motion, which goes to the heart of participation in our democracy, quick action and leadership we should all commend. Everyone across this chamber tonight should support this motion as amended by the Liberal Democrats. Starting or extending a family should not be a barrier to being elected to this great chamber. Residents across this borough will be stunned to hear that particularly women councillors are not explicitly entitled to maternity leave or support after having a baby. Madam Mayor, if we want our discussions on issues from parking to vulnerable children to be representative of our community, we need more women to be elected, particularly in the west of the borough. This motion will explicitly remove a barrier to that goal. Benefits of this motion will also extend to partners. It seems a lifetime away now, but I was the first councillor in this council term to take paternity leave under the unofficial policy in May 2018. Not 2 weeks after my election, my son Sam was born. Instead of dealing with the challenges of birth baths, nappy changes and feeding, Sam was instead in the high dependency ward of St George's Hospital, fighting the battle against sepsis. The treatment he received was amazing, and the story has a happy ending. There was no way in hell I was going to leave his bedside or my wife to attend the council meeting that month. With support from officers, Labour group staff, fellow councillors, I took 2 weeks paternity leave and noted my first and only absence to a full council meeting. But I was there for my family. I took 2 weeks leave. How could a leader of a council, a cabinet member, or a committee chair, or a backbench councillor take 3, 6, or even 12 months? This motion agrees a formal cross-party approach to support the future councillors wanting to start or extend their family. I hope you will all support it and show the leadership as other councils across the country have got formal policies too. Thank you very much.
We have 2 amendments, and we will deal with them in the order they were submitted. Firstly, the Liberal Democrat amendment. Councillor Bailey to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to say first of all that we were really pleased with the motion when it arrived in our inboxes, and we were happy to support that. And we're glad to hear that our amendment is seen as a positive one. We hope that you, sounds like you agree that it's going to help strengthen it. Our amendment is simply asking the council to review ways of making being a council more accessible. Having looked at the recent study by the LGA, which evidences the lack of representation across councils in the country, we can see that Merton's actually doing pretty well. So I want to acknowledge the work so far and thank you all, but also ask for more. The unamended motion would be a good assistance to those in Cabinet or chairs of committees, giving a sense of security, and so moving you discussed by Councillor Mundy, like that's really good evidence that it works. So we're pleased that this is being made more official and explicit. However, there are other things that can be done to make being a councillor open to everybody. Just a couple of examples, like as it currently stands, if we need to meet an officer about the issue in our ward, that has to be done within office hours. You've heard a lot about planning representations tonight, but that's another thing. We used to be able to view them on our phone, on our website. Now we have to give notice and come in and see them. So if you have responsibility for caring for someone, if you haven't ever noticed it, or if you have a job full time, this is really difficult. And it's one of the things that people ask me about when they say, I tell them I'm a counsellor, they're like, oh my God, how do you do it? Do you ever see your friends? When was the last time you saw your family? Can you help me with my bin? Those are the questions I get. Sorry, I have to credit a card pulling for that. So yeah, thinking about that, especially when we're in a small group, it's really hard. It's obviously an honest feeling of it. people? Could there be more options for work officers? So it's not, we want to make it not just about our ability to meet in the evenings, but can they also? They're building better accessibility for those with disabilities. Could things like childcare and civic centre, better clerical support for groups, could these things feel like they could help? So what we're seeking is for the council to build on the work which has already started and look for ways to help ensure that every voice in the borough is heard. And I'm really pleased to hear that they will be supporting this amendment. So thank you very much.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Quillian.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to the Labour Group for coming to accept our amendment. I do feel like I should have added something about accepting dad jokes. Now, this is a really welcome move. Thank you for bringing it to the Chamber. It is a real live issue for those who are parents or and who've taken the decision to enter public life. I myself started my shared parental leave a week and a half before the election, which I don't recommend to anybody if you ever have the opportunity to choose. So come Friday after the election, I still had more than 2 months to go as the main carer for my daughter, while trying to get to grips with this new role. So that's partly why I wanted to add a small amendment to the motion, and it's a good motion, but obviously it also kind of applies primarily to cabinet members. So guidance and support for backbench councillors, I think, would be really useful as well. Although obviously we all know there's always going to be some sort of trade-off. But also looking at other ways of supporting councillors and potential councillors obviously can be really beneficial. When I was first elected, I ended up having to bring my daughter to some of the meetings and to get my tea set up and all that kind of stuff, which was fine. But I think I did give one officer a surprise who arrived mid-packy change to our temporary office because I saw the word facilities here. So obviously it obviously seems like a digression, but it's the kind of thing that it's worth considering as part of any kind of wider review. Actually, new parents, how do you manage that first introduction to the council? Obviously, councillors have a whole range of caring responsibilities, not just for parents. So I hope this motion offers a good opportunity for us to start to think more broadly about what we can do to support that. We'll be supporting the motion, and thank you again for supporting our amendment.
Following listed to speak, Councillor McGrath.
Madam Mayor, first of all, let me thank the Labour Group and hopefully our colleagues and Conservatives as well for supporting the motion. I know they have their own amendment. There is one section, Madam Mayor, that I'd like to comment on, and that's the section about dependent parents' allowances. Madam Mayor, I'd like you to take your mind back to November 2017, and you may remember that the then one Lib Dem councillor, my colleague Mary Jane Jeanes, and the Merton Park Independents proposed a motion to the council that we should look to pay the London living wage to all carers employed by outsourced suppliers to the council, and that was voted down by the Labour Group. I'd like to understand the logic, and we will of course agree with this and think it's a great idea, but I would like to understand, can you hear the Labour Council explaining why it's okay to pay the London living wage for people looking after council dependents, but not for those of our residents. So thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Atterwar, do you wish to use your right to reply now or after the Conservative amendment? I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Can I have a show of hands in favour? And against? Thank you. No voting? Not voting? No. amendment is carried, 41 for, 16 against. We now move to the Conservative amendment. Councillor Ormerod, please move your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you can see from the seats taken in this room today, I'd like to believe that all parties representing Merton look how diverse we all are, and I feel that it's something that everybody in this chamber does duly champion. Could we be better? I'd argue yes, but that usually isn't down to decisions made by individuals in this chamber, but by individuals wanting to be involved in politics either at a local or a national level. There are many reasons why people do or don't want to get involved in politics, and whilst we are all in this position as elected representatives for local people, it is our job to do what we can to make it easier for people to step forward. If parental leave policies is a barrier to entry, then yes, we do need to address this and undertake a comprehensive review of all the measures to ensure that Merton residents do feel able to stand, regardless of background, age, disability, race, gender, work or caring responsibilities. I fully agree. But let's do that together. And from reading from the Labour motion, I couldn't quite determine from any of that material what the financial impact would be on the council, what the projected difference would be in terms of promoting working as a councillor in Merton would be. In other words, what is the projected difference we would actually make? A plan for what could change could be debated within a task group, or otherwise with a plan drawn up by councillors. I know that other councillors who have adopted the policy have run consultation before a motion was passed through to council to approve, and simply as we do the same here in Merton. Therefore, I support the amendment to this motion.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Morton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm happy to second this amendment, which provides for the consideration of more ideas and for officers to review all potential measures rather than just enshrining a vague Labour policy into the Constitution. We can note that we should all, as councillors, be entitled to parental leave, and all carers of children, or indeed adults, can claim in order to carry out their councillor duties whilst looking after others. Madam Mayor, as a working mother myself, and yourself, and as councillor for 17 years, I also fully supported promoting being a councillor to residents from all walks of life and their support, so that any Merton resident can do so. Madam Mayor, I urge all here tonight to support this amendment and provide further opportunity to bring forward a good policy for this council. Thank you.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Atawar, do you wish to use your right of reply?
I just wanted to thank all parties for their contribution to this debate, and in particular my colleagues on my side for the work that has gone into putting this together, in particular my colleague Kate Ward.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Can I have a show of hands in favour? And against? Thank you. And those not voting? The amendment is lost. 16 for, 31 against, 10 not voting. I will now call for a vote on the motion as amended. Can I have a show of hands in favour? And those against? And those not voting? Carried. order of the agenda to swap items 12 and item 15. The order will be as follows. Item 15, then item 13, 14, item 12, and then the rest of the items in order. Item 15, preparing the Council for the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union. Councillor Allison, will you move this report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm delighted that tonight, here in a 1960s building on the edge of the suburbs, we're able to do something that is not currently permitted in the mother of all parliaments. We are considering one of the biggest issues ever to affect our borough or our country. At the last council meeting, I said I was happy to report on the council's preparations for Brexit, but it was unlikely to be happy reading. And as a good business-like council, this report shows that we have taken reasonable steps to avert the worst for our residents. But we have always been clear that Brexit would be bad for the borough and bad for those who live and work here. As the report reminds us, we Merton councillors have always said that once people know what Brexit means, they should be allowed to confirm it is the outcome they wanted. A confirmatory vote is still the council's position, with support not just from Labour, but also from other parties. But Madam Mayor, it is quite clear the referendum of 2016 was based on there being a deal. No deal was not on the ballot. And now that the Yellow Panel papers have been published, thanks to a vote in Parliament backed by our local MPs, Siobhan McDonough and Stephen Hammond, we can see why. Although ministers have tried to say the contents are just worst-case assumptions, it's well documented that they have always been labelled as base scenario. And as a result, despite the work of this council, if Yellowhammer is right, it is not possible, among other things, for me to guarantee there will be fresh food in Merton's shops. And it is not possible for me to guarantee medicines for our sick, as drugs are particularly vulnerable to disruption at our ports. We therefore call on all our local MPs to continue to vote against no deal. Indeed, I would like to take this opportunity, the first we have, to applaud one of our former members as councillors, Councillor Stephen Hammond, for standing up for what is right. Obviously, he is not a natural political soulmate, but Merton's Conservative slogan was once, putting people first, and it is admirable that he has put protecting his residents first. He has done a decent thing and has paid a very heavy price. And I know he has many friends here tonight, and they are faced with a terrible choice between supporting him, their friend, or a Prime Minister who has sacked their friend, among other decent, lifelong Conservatives, including Churchill's grandson. And a Prime Minister who has forced the closure of Parliament at a time of national emergency. Now, I can't say I would ever vote for their friend, but perhaps when the election comes, they will put loyalty, friendship, decency and the people of Wimbledon first, and not vote for a no-deal Tory candidate imposed by Johnson and Cummings. Here in Merton, we have demonstrated that we are putting our people first, by doing what we can to mitigate the effects of Brexit on our residents. These will be bad and could cause real economic hardship. But I commend the actions that we've taken so far and call on everyone here to oppose no deal.
This, I believe, is being seconded by Councillor Ambrosius.
Madam Mayor, for the record, I'll not be taking long. Madam Mayor, if you're asking me, do I have any regrets about creating a cabinet role around Brexit? No. Am I sorry about establishing a Brexit task group to look at the implications of Brexit? No. Do I feel I have some responsibility to our 24,000 EU citizens? Yes. They are our residents, our neighbours, our friends, our partners, our colleagues, and our future. I accept all of the above, and councillors voting tonight and people watching from the gallery will have to decide if we are on the right track. I cannot put it more bluntly than this, that the attempts by this council to ensure all its EU nationals feel welcome and supported in this borough will, Madam Mayor, succeed. Madam Mayor, for the record, I second this report. Thank you.
Following listed to speak, Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I begin by thanking the officers for preparing this report and for the leadership ensuring that appropriate preparations are undertaken as the United Kingdom leaves the European Union. With all areas mentioned in this report, while the areas mentioned in the report are important and indeed need to be reviewed regularly, it is also right there is particular emphasis on adult social care sector and the settlement status of our EU friends who live and work in the borough. Madam Mayor, we welcome the report and the detailed preparations that both Merton Council and the Conservative government are undertaking. Thank you.
Councillor Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to welcome this report and thank the officers for the hard work they're doing on this particularly difficult issue. History will, of course, be damning of the two great parties of the 20th century UK politics and the mess that they've got us into. The Conservative Party chose a referendum to deal with divisions on their side within them, and of course just made those divisions worse. The Labour Party, as many of my friends on the Labour benches know, are paralysed by those divisions between them. The country is now facing a cliff edge Brexit offered by Boris Johnson, or a weird offer from Jeremy Corbyn, the Schrodinger's cat version of Brexit, whereby he will negotiate a new deal and then tell you he's both in favour of it and against it, or neither, or any one of the above. Our local MPs, I would also give credit to them both. Both of them, it has to be said, did vote to trigger Article 50, but both have, to an extent, recanted. Siobhan McDonough has now said she was wrong, and of course, a supporter of people's vote, to her great credit. Stephen Hammond, more latterly, has, of course, made a supreme sacrifice in voting against the no deal. And he deserves credit for that, although let us remember he still wants us to leave on a deal. He's still supporting leave. He's not supporting remain. I'd like to make two just brief amendments, if I can, or two questions about the report. First, with regard to the settled status of EU nationals. I understand from officers it is possible the council to give council tax data going back to whenever council tax was paid by a resident that would clearly be helpful to EU nationals. I know the norm is just to give them confirmation of their current status, but I'd like officers to think about whether they could confirm all their payments from when they started paying, and that would clearly help in getting settled status. And lastly, on the alternative options element, I'd like to thank Councillor Morden for this suggestion, of course, on Channel 4 recently. If Parliament fails to get a people's vote, there is, of course, an alternative option. One can, of course, as Councillor Morden is considering, it seems, one can vote Lib Dem and revoke Article 50 in any forthcoming election. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Allison, do you wish to use your right of reply?
I can say a couple of things. I mean, I couldn't possibly comment on which way people should vote in a general election, but obviously Councillor Kohler will have his preference for very obvious personal reasons. I understand why they changed their mind, but I don't think it's the right thing to have done recently, for what it's worth. But more substantive thing that you mentioned was about the issue of council tax and settled status. I think that one of the issues that certainly some people who've been involved in the process have found is that people from overseas aren't necessarily the named person on things like bills and council tax, and that's one of the reasons why they're facing such difficulty, and actually why there's such a scandalous thing that around a third of the people now who are applying for settled status aren't getting it. They're just having to make do with pre-settled status, and that's despite what the government have promised, and that's absolutely outrageous. Really, a great reason to be Conservative government to feel utterly ashamed of what they do. They clearly not thought this through. It's not right. It's not right to our residents. It's not right to people who've lived and worked in this country for years and contributed to what a great place Merton is. So that's that point. I would just end by repeating what I said earlier. No deal is going to be absolutely devastating for not just people from overseas, but for many people in this country. And we all, whatever our political allegiances, will have to wrestle with our consciences. The government right now, the Prime Minister right now, is doing terrible, roguish, nasty things, along with his accomplice crimes. And I think that there are people in this room who will have to consider that their position as a result of it, we should oppose no deal as a council.
As I have no further speakers, I call for a vote. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 13, Children and Young People's Plan. Councillor Braunt, will you move the report?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor. For many years, Merton's Children's Trust brought together key partners to set joint priorities for Merton's children and young people. But when creating our plan from 2019 to 23, we took a different approach. As a demonstration of our commitment to the children and young people of Merton, we handed the consultation and construction of the plan over to the children and young residents themselves, led by our young inspectors, in particular Toby and Martin, who my heartfelt thanks need to go out to. The Children's Trust is ambitious for all the children and young people of our borough, and by listening to what those young residents care about, this plan focuses in on their priorities and demonstrates how we as a trust can help to achieve those aims. Partners will now build an annual action plan with specific and measurable activities to deliver the priorities over the next 5 years. This plan will be monitored by the Children's Trust Board, and our progress will also be scrutinised by our young residents, so that we can make sure that every child in Merton matters. I commend this plan for adoption by full council, and I hope that our young residents' work will receive cross-party support this evening. Thank you, Madam.
This, I believe, is being formally seconded by Councillor Stringer.
Yep, formally second, and I'd just like to also thank the young people involved in shaping this. It's been great to get that this.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Ormerod.
We will be agreeing to the plan. Thank you.
Councillor Gould.
Madam Mayor, we welcome the Children and Young People's Plan and recognise all the hard work that has gone into by Merton's young people. Our children and young people are in crisis. Our streets are polluted and we are in a climate emergency. There is toxic testing in schools. Over a third of children leaving primary school are overweight and obese. And there has been a significant rise in pupils with education and health care plan. Not surprisingly, 2,380 children in Merton are suffering mental health issues. This council isn't helping children who want to stay active. There are no cycle paths to and from school in Merton. Young people told the council that healthy activities are too expensive. But now the council has taken away free tennis to be replaced by pay-to-play. Youth clubs are underfunded or closed with nowhere for our youth to gather. An issue highlighted in the media recently as a reason for rising crime. A new academy school built in an area already polluted, and it will not good enough. We need to take action now with ambition, expectations and accountability that can be assessed this year for progress. This CYPP should be at the heart of the local plan, ensuring that the council achieves the best environments for our children and young people. It's time.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Broad, do you wish to use your right of reply?
I think I probably should. I just want to say that I appreciate the sentiments put forward by Councillor Gould, and I would stress that there is a framework in which this plan is going to be delivered, and that I'm sure that her ideas and her contribution will be welcome in pulling together the action plan. And what I'd like most out of all of this is, outside of this chamber, it's the young residents' voice that speaks the most. Thank you.
As I have no further speakers, I call for a vote. Is that agreed? Agreed. Item 14, Docklands Bikes Bylaw. Councillor Welton, will you move this report?
Madam Mayor, I formally move the recommendations set out in the report. This report details the concept of the Docklands cycle schemes and seeks support for a pan-London bylaw for Docklands bikes, and sets and delegates to London Council's Transport and Environment Committee, which is represented by all London boroughs, to make a bylaw to regulate their use. Currently, the operation of a Docklands cycle scheme is essentially unregulated across London and has become increasingly difficult to effectively manage operators. This will lead to a more coordinated approach across London instead of the individual agreement and trials by boroughs with specific operators. In recent years, a number of Docklands cycle schemes have been adopted in London with mixed results. Although boroughs are supportive of the idea and I note the potential for the modal shift towards cycling, it quickly became clear that boroughs had limited regulatory means available to manage schemes effectively. There has also been operators that have since withdrawn and others who are looking at setting up. Given previous issues concerning inconsiderate and obstructive parking and renewed interest in Docklands bike schemes, plus new operators to the market, it is likely that an ongoing need to manage Docklands bike schemes will continue, and boroughs would require the legal power to effectively manage the schemes. You would also set out minimum safety standards for bikes. Requires all bikes to be chipped to ensure their whereabouts can always be tracked. Requires all bikes to be let, whether by Docklands operators or their customers, only in places agreed by the relevant local authority. But also makes an offence for Docklands operators to place or allow their bikes to be parked anywhere other than in a location agreed by the local authority. It also sets a penalty for Docklands operators committing the above offences. Local issues such as the location and number of designated Docklands parking spaces would be for individual councils to still determine. I ask Council tonight to approve this bylaw. Thank you.
This, I believe, is being formally seconded by Councillor Andrushes.
I thought this.
The guillotine will fall at 10:15. Do councillors wish to extend the meeting? I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We will be agreeing this. I'm glad that the Labour group are now moving towards supporting the idea of Docklands bikes. I met some of these providers to provide out their bikes, and it's a good way for lots of leaders who don't have space at home or outside to actually use bikes to get around. My only ask would be that when they get too draconian, actually exactly what they need to do together. Otherwise, I'm fully in favour of this. Thank you.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Wilson, do you wish to use your right of reply?
No, Madam
Mayor. I call for a vote. Is that agreed? Item 12, approval of Merton's Local Development Scheme 2019-2022. Councillor Welton, will you move this report?
Thank you. I would formally like to move the recommendations as set out in the report. At this point, I'd like to also thank the work of the Borough Plan Advisory Committee and its chair, Aidan Mundy, for all the work they've undertaken today on the Borough Plan and on the planning policy documents which go towards the Merton Local Development Scheme. This report sets out a timetable for the plans and processes we will follow, which include the preparation and adoption of Merton's local plan and the South London Waste Plan. As a council, we are guided by the London Plan and need by local development scheme to be in compliance, which sets out the planning framework for London. It also sets out a number of key planning issues, including our housing needs, which has been subject to much debate within the council, identified opportunity areas for development, and looks at strategic transport developments, including Tramlink and Crossrail 2. As our own local plan of all boroughs must be in general conformity with the policies of the Mayor's London Plan, it is important that this is in place first before we move ahead and improve our own. If our plan was to be out of sync with the London Plan, it could fail itself when facing examination. Whereas London boroughs, including Merton, have given the increase our share of London housing and the associated infrastructure considerations, they will be expected to live in the new London Plan. Merton Council's response to the draft London Plan supported many aspects of the Mayor's Plan, but we have raised concerns about the deliverability of a new housing target for Merton of 1,400, which is the highest percentage increase in London. It would be extremely high risk to try and finalise Merton's local plan until the Mayor's London Plan is completed and published, and Merton can develop the evidence, including further consultation on housing and associated infrastructure relevant to its local plan. Revising the local plan would also best support Morden regen. Since the 2019 consultation specific to us and Morden closed, Merton Council has been working closely with TfL and the GLA to deliver Merton regeneration. A development partner will be appointed in 2020 and will therefore be in place at the time of the local plan's proposed submission to the Secretary of State in 2021. I ask Council to support the recommendations. Thank you.
I believe this has been seconded by Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I formally second and wish to place on record my thanks to the cross-party committee's work and that of officers on this report. Thank you.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Latif.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been involved in the various stages of the borough development, the local development scheme through the borough development and the Appendix 2. And I agree with a lot of the statements made by Councillor Walton, so we will be approving the improvement of this.
Councillor Quilliam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll waive my rights.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Welton, do you wish to use your right to reply?
No, Madam Mayor.
As I have no further speakers, can I call for a vote? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 16, appointment of monitoring officer. Councillor Allison, will you formally move this report? This, I believe, has been formally seconded by Councillor Anna Bridges.
I formally second.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor McLean.
Agree, Ms. Mayor.
Is it agreed?
Agreed.
Item 17, changes to membership of committees and related matters. Councillor Anne Bridges, will you formally move this report?
I formally move.
I think this is formally seconded by Councillor Addison. I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 18, petitions. Councillor Anne Bridges.
Yes. Move decisions.
I believe it's formally seconded. Now, we are on the final item. Can I ask Councillor Anna Bridges to put forward the strategic theme for the next ordinary meeting of the Council on the 20th of November 2019?
There will be children and young people with an emphasis on our great schools.
With no further business, I declare this meeting of the Council closed.